The slap cracked across the bar like a gunshot. Every glass stopped rattling. Every voice died. Leah Mercer didn't move for a full second, not because she was stunned, but because she was counting. Counting the distance between herself and the man who had just hit her. Counting the exits. Counting the witnesses who were already looking away. Owen Pike pulled his hand back for a second blow, and that was when Leah moved one wrist. One turn, 2 seconds, and 220 pounds of arrogance hit the floor. Before you find out who this quiet woman really is. Subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. The Anchor House smelled the way it always did on a Thursday evening: fried food, spilled draft, and the particular kind of loneliness that men carry in from long shifts at the port. The booths along the wall were filling up with the usual crowd. Dock workers, freight clerks, a couple of retired Navy men nursing beers at the bar, comparing notes on joints that ached in weather they could no longer ignore. Country music came low from the speakers mounted above the register, the kind of song no one was actually listening to, but everyone was grateful for, because it filled the silence between strangers who didn't have much to say to each other. Leah Mercer had chosen the corner table deliberately. Her back was to the wall, which meant she could see the front entrance, both side exits, the kitchen door, and every person seated between her and the bar without turning her head. This was not paranoia. It was a habit so deeply embedded in her nervous system that she did not think about it any more than she thought about breathing. She had been doing it since she was 22 years old, which was the first time someone had tried to kill her in a narrow space with bad lighting. And she had survived by knowing exactly where everyone in the room was standing before the shooting started. That was 11 years ago. A different life, a different Leah. Tonight she was wearing jeans and a plain gray pullover, and she had ordered water with lemon and a bowl of chowder she had barely touched. Because she was not here to eat. She was here to meet a man named Gerald Holt, who had spent 4 months working as a cargo verification clerk at Tidewater Port, and who had sent 3 increasingly nervous messages to a federal task force inbox before going silent for 6 days. Leah had spent those 6 days tracking down his last known address, his sister's phone number, his usual route to work, and the name of the bar where Gerald liked to drink alone on Thursday nights when he couldn't sleep. The Anchor House. Booth 4, second from the back. Right side. She had arrived 40 minutes early. Gerald would be here by 8. That gave her time to settle in, let the staff get used to her face, and watch the room until she understood its rhythms, the way she understood the rhythms of all spaces, who was loud without being dangerous, who was quiet in a way that mattered, and who was the kind of person that other people gave too much room to without quite knowing why. Owen Pike was the kind of person who got too much room. She had noticed him within 5 minutes of sitting down. He had come through the door like he owned it, and the slight adjustment, the almost imperceptible collective flinch that rippled through the nearest cluster of dock workers told Leah everything she needed to know about him before he opened his mouth. He was big, the way men who have never been genuinely tested often are, carrying weight across the shoulders that suggested he had lifted things as a younger man, and had since allowed that strength to curdle into something heavier and less useful. He wore a port security jacket with a supervisor patch on the left breast, and he wore it with the particular carelessness of a man who wanted people to notice it without appearing to care whether they did. He settled at the bar 2 stools from the end and ordered a bourbon, and the bartender, a steady-looking man in his 40s named Walt, according to the name tag Leah had already read from across the room, poured it without conversation. The drink was gone in 2 swallows. He ordered another. The second went down almost as fast. Leah watched this without appearing to watch it. She kept her eyes on the window and her hands around her water glass, and she tracked Owen Pike in her peripheral vision, the way she had once tracked hostile vessels through a scope, patiently, without drama, knowing that patience was its own form of readiness. Tessa Rowe was working the floor tables. She was young, 22, maybe 23, with dark hair pulled back and the particular exhausted competence of someone who has waited tables long enough to do it without conscious thought. She moved efficiently, smiled at the right moments, kept her refills ahead of the customer's empty glass. She was good at her job in the way that people who genuinely need their jobs tend to be. When Tessa passed behind Owen Pike to deliver drinks to the table beside him, he reached out and caught her wrist. Not roughly, not yet. In the practiced way of a man who has done it before and has learned exactly how much pressure makes a person stop without making them scream. "Hey," he said, not loudly, just loud enough to reach her. "I'm talking to you. I have a table." "Mr. Pike, they can wait." He kept his grip. "Get me another waltz at the bar." I want you to get it." Leah set her spoon down carefully. Tessa extracted her wrist with the practiced subtlety of someone who has had to extract her wrist before. And she went back behind the bar and poured the drink and brought it to Owen without meeting his eyes. He said something to her, low, that Leah could not hear from across the room. Tessa went still in a way that had nothing to do with calm. Then she said something brief in return and moved away. Owen drank his third bourbon. 20 minutes passed. Leah watched the door, calculating Gerald Holt's likely arrival time against the fading light through the front window and the way the evening crowd was beginning to thicken. She had run this kind of seek out enough times to know that the mind needed something to do during the waiting, or it started manufacturing problems that weren't there yet. She was thinking about the stolen generators when Owen Pike's voice cut through the bar noise. "I said come here." He had moved. He was on his feet now, and he had put himself between Tessa and the end of the bar in the way that large men sometimes do when they have decided that movement itself is a form of argument. Tessa was holding an empty tray against her chest like it was a shield, which it was. "Sir, I think you've had enough." "You think?" He laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "You think? You've been ignoring me all night. You think I don't notice? I'm a supervisor at this port. I have more authority in my left hand than your entire family has ever." "She's right," Leah said. Her voice was level, not raised, not sharp, just present. The way a door closing is present, it makes a sound. And then there is silence, and everyone in the room knows something has changed. Owen turned slowly. He looked at Leah the way men like him look at women who have interrupted them in public, with the particular contempt that carries the assumption that this will be resolved quickly in his favor, because it always has been. He took her in from across the room, the plain clothes, the half-eaten chowder, the water glass, the stillness. "Mind your business," he said. "She has a table to get to," Leah said. "Let her go." The room had changed. Not loudly, the music was still playing, but the conversations nearest the bar had stopped, in the way that conversations near a car accident stop not because anything has happened yet, but because everyone can feel the pressure of what is about to happen. Owen turned away from the bar and walked toward her table. Leah did not move. She watched him come. She had already mapped his body the forward lean. That meant his balance was in his heels. The rolling shoulder that told her he was accustomed to using his size as a first move. The set of his jaw that said he had never actually fought a person who knew what they were doing. She had all of this information before he reached her table, and she stored it away in the calm, organized way that training builds over years of necessity. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Nobody," Leah said. "Leave her alone and go sit down." He put his hands on her table. He leaned in close. His bourbon breath was close enough to taste, and Leah held his gaze, without blinking, without leaning back, without any of the involuntary retreating signals that he had learned to count on from people he intimidated. That stillness confused him. She could see it in his face, the small flicker of recalibration, the moment where he searched for the script he knew and found it wasn't running. So he did what men like him do when confusion arrives. He escalated. "You don't know who you're talking to," he said. "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Leah said quietly. His hand came before she anticipated it, not because she was slow, but because she had genuinely believed he would stop short of it. Here, in a bar full of witnesses, because most men who use their size as a threat don't actually want the confrontation to get physical in a public space. She had miscalculated his pride. The slap was open-palmed and caught the left side of her jaw. It was not small. The sound of it made Walt flinch behind the bar. Tessa made a sound that was not quite a word. Two of the dock workers at the nearest table stood up, and then looked at each other, and then did not move. In the way that witnesses to violence sometimes freeze in the gap between wanting to act and not knowing how. Leah's head had moved with the impact. She straightened it without touching her face. She looked at him. Owen pulled his hand back to strike again. And Leah Mercer moved. It lasted 2 seconds. Later, the people in that bar would struggle to explain it to each other. Would replay it in pieces, the way you replay something that happened faster than your comprehension could track. What they could agree on was this: his hand came back, and then something shifted. The woman caught his wrist in a grip that seemed to barely require effort, and her other hand was somewhere that changed his center of gravity. And Owen Pike, who was 6'2" and 220 pounds, went down to the floor of the Anchor House Tavern, like a man who had been standing on ice and suddenly found himself without it. He hit the ground hard. He was not unconscious. He was simply pinned, face down, left arm controlled at the wrist in a position that every nerve in his shoulder was registering as a polite but extremely precise warning not to move. He moved anyway. He bucked against her. Leah adjusted her grip by approximately 3 degrees. Owen went very still. "Stop," she said. "I will let go the moment you stop." He was breathing hard through his nose. His face was pressed against the floor, around them. The Anchor House was completely silent. The music was still running, which made the silence stranger. Country guitar, threading through a room where 40 people had stopped breathing. "Who the Owen started. Stop talking," Leah said. "And stop moving, and I will let go." He stopped. She released him. She stepped back a single pace and straightened. And she did not look at the room. She looked at Walt. "Call the police, please." Walt had already picked up the phone. Owen pushed himself up from the floor. His face had gone through red and was arriving at something deeper and more complex, not just rage, but the particular humiliation of a man who has just discovered, in front of an audience, that the story he has been telling himself about what he is and what he is capable of does not match the available evidence. He pressed his hands to the bar to steady himself, and he stared at Leah with the look of a person searching for something to say that will restore the narrative he has lost. "You're going to regret that," he said. "Sit down," Leah said. And she turned away from him. She turned away because she was finished with him, which was its own kind of message. She did not watch him to make sure he obeyed. She walked back to her table, sat down, picked up her water glass, and took a sip. He sat down. From the corner booth by the jukebox, a man in his 60s who had been sitting so quietly that Leah had almost catalogued him as furniture watched all of this with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who has spent a significant portion of his life learning how to evaluate other people's decisions under pressure. His name was Aaron Bell. He had retired from the United States Navy 13 years ago with the rank of Senior Chief Petty Officer, and for 21 of the 25 years prior to that retirement, he had worked alongside, supported, trained, and occasionally argued with members of Naval Special Warfare. He knew what he was looking at. The police arrived 14 minutes later. Owen had spent those 14 minutes nursing his 4th bourbon in furious, elaborate silence, and when the 2 officers came through the door, he straightened and composed himself into a version of aggrieved authority that Leah recognized immediately as performance. She had seen it in deposition rooms and naval inquiry hearings and everywhere that people who have done something they know is wrong attempt to rewrite the record before it gets written. The lead officer, a compact woman named Santos, who had the particular walk of someone who has been first through a lot of doors, spoke with Walt first. Then she spoke with 3 of the customers nearest the bar who had seen the slap. Then she came to Leah's table. "You the one who restrained him?" "Yes," Leah said. "You injured?" "No." Officer Santos looked at her steadily for a moment. "He's claiming assault." "He would," Leah said. "Walt has security footage. So does the camera above the register and the one covering the east side of the bar near the emergency exit. You'll want all 3 angles." Santos blinked. Then she nodded once, slowly, and went back toward the bar. Across the room, Owen was watching Leah with the new attention of a man who has just realized that the woman he was nobody might be considerably more complicated than that. Leah did not return the look. She was watching the door. Because it was now 8:14, and Gerald Holt was 14 minutes late. And in Leah's experience, 14 minutes of lateness from a nervous witness in an active federal investigation meant one of 2 things. He had gotten cold feet, or someone had gotten to him first. Aaron Bell appeared at her table without invitation. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the deliberate courtesy of a man who has asked permission with his body language and is waiting to see if it will be declined. Leah looked at him. "Senior Chief," she said. It was not a question. He smiled, and it changed his face into something warmer and more tired than his posture suggested. "You've still got the look," he said, "even in civilian clothes. Even doing nothing." He paused. "Where'd you serve?" "Multiple theaters," Leah said. "You Warcom, then training pipeline support out of Coronado. Retired from Norfolk." He glanced toward Owen, who was now in a heated, low conversation with Officer Santos that appeared to be going poorly for him. "What he just did, the slap. That wasn't a one-time thing." "No," Leah agreed. "The girl he was harassing, Tessa. Her brother worked the cargo bays until about 3 weeks ago. Then he stopped showing up." Aaron's voice was careful, measured. "People around here have been told to stop wondering why." Leah looked at him fully for the first time. "How do you know that?" "Because I sit in this bar twice a week, and I pay attention," Aaron said simply. "And because Miles Rowe, that's Tessa's brother, he came to me 6 weeks ago. He was scared. I told him to go to the authorities." He paused again. "I don't know if he did." Tessa materialized at the edge of the table, and she did not look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a person who has been holding something for too long and has finally identified someone she trusts enough to put it down. Her hands were steady, which told Leah something important about her. "You protected me," Tessa said. "You didn't need much protecting," Leah said. "You were already standing your ground." Tessa shook her head. "He was going to keep escalating. He always does." She glanced toward Owen, who was now arguing with Santos in a way that was visibly failing to impress the officer. "He runs Warehouse 12. Last month, my brother Miles told me he saw workers changing serial numbers on medical containers. Medical containers that were supposed to go to the Veterans Center." Her voice tightened. "Owen found out Miles had seen it. He went to Miles's apartment. He didn't hit him. He's smarter than that when there are no witnesses. But Miles knew what was coming, so he left." Leah's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her water glass. The Benjamin Hart Veterans Recovery Center. She had read that name in a task force briefing 43 days ago, when the case had been little more than a missing equipment report filed by a logistics coordinator who had noticed that a significant shipment of emergency generators, portable medical units, and rescue supplies had arrived at Tidewater Port and then failed to continue on to its destination. The investigation had widened from there: insurance fraud, contract manipulation, stolen public relief supplies. But the name of the destination had stayed with her in a way that the case details themselves had not. Benjamin Hart. She had known Benjamin Hart. She had served with him. And she had held his hand in a flooded cargo hold on a ship off the coast of a country she was not officially in, and she had been unable to stop the thing that happened next. And she had left the Navy 8 months after that, because she was no longer certain she deserved to occupy the space that he no longer could. "What happened to your brother after he left?" Leah said. "He called me. He's safe." Tessa's voice dropped. But he has photographs. On a phone he left behind because he was scared it was being tracked. The phone is still in his locker at the warehouse. Owen doesn't know it exists. Leah was quiet for a moment. She was not looking at Tessa. She was doing the thing she did when information arrived, and she needed to integrate it into the structure of what she already knew. She was very still, and something behind her eyes was moving fast. "Who assigned you to work tonight?" she asked finally. "Owen," Tessa said, and then stopped. "Oh, who else knew you'd be here?" Tessa thought about it. "Walt. The schedule. That's it, goes through the Port Workers Union Board. Anyone who has access to the scheduling system." Could she stopped again. "He knew I'd be here. He came specifically because I'd be here." "Yes," Leah said. Owen Pike had not come to the Anchor House tonight to drink. He had come to deliver a message to a young woman whose brother had seen something he was not supposed to see, a message delivered in the oldest language available to men like him. The language of public humiliation and escalating threat, designed to make Tessa understand that her brother's defiance had consequences and that she herself was not beyond those consequences. It had not gone as planned. Across the room, Officer Santos had finished whatever exchange she had been having with Owen and was making a brief call on her radio. Owen sat very still on his bar stool, and his stillness was not like Leah's stillness. It was the stillness of a man calculating his next move, which meant he still believed he had moves left to make. He was right, Leah thought. He did. He just didn't know yet what kind of move she was planning to make first. Erin Bell refilled her water glass from the carafe on the table without asking. It was a small gesture and a precise one, and it told her that he understood the scope of what was happening, without needing it explained. "You're here on something," he said. "I'm here on nothing," Leah said. "Officially, unofficially, a federal maritime task force. Missing emergency supplies. Intended for a veterans rehabilitation center named after a man I served with." Erin Bell was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a second police vehicle had arrived, and the light from its console was painting the front windows in alternating colors that made the bar look briefly like a stage set. One of the dock workers had begun photographing the scene with his phone, the unconscious social impulse to document before it becomes memory. The country music was still playing, absurdly sweetly. The singer advising someone to let something go. "Miles Rowe," Erin said. "If he has photographs and Owen knows there are witnesses to what happened tonight, he's going to move fast. Whatever evidence is in that warehouse, it won't be there by morning." "I know," Leah said. "What do you need?" She looked at him. She considered him. She had been considering him since the moment he sat down, measuring him the way she measured everyone, not for threat, but for reliability, which was a different kind of measurement, requiring different instruments. Erin Bell was reading as reliable. His record, if she could pull it, would probably confirm what his body language already told her. A man who had operated in high-stakes environments long enough to know the difference between brave and reckless, and who had chosen brave consistently enough that it had become indistinguishable from habit. "I need someone who knows this port," she said. "Someone who knows the layout of Warehouse 12 and the secondary access routes and the shift rotation, and who is working tonight." "I know all of those things," Erin said. "I know," Leah said. "I retired," he said. "I'm 64 years old, and I have a bad left knee. I spend Thursday evenings in this bar." "I know," Leah said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled again. And this time it was not warm. It was something cleaner and older than warmth. It was the smile of a man remembering something he had almost convinced himself he'd forgotten. "Tell me what you're working with," he said. Leah looked toward the door one more time. Gerald Holt was not coming. She had accepted this in the last 60 seconds with the particular resignation of someone who has learned to account for the loss of assets in real time and continue operating. She would find another way to him. She always found another way. She turned back to Erin Bell, and she began to talk. Not quickly, she was never quick hadn't finished evaluating, but precisely. with the economical clarity of a person who has spent years briefing other people on situations where an excess of words was its own kind of danger. She told him about the task force and the missing generators and the falsified manifests and the shipping contractor named Darren Voss, whose name appeared in 7 separate discrepancies across 4 months of port records. She told him about Gerald Holt and the 6 days of silence. She did not tell him about Benjamin Hart, because that was not information relevant to the operational picture. It was only relevant to why she was still sitting in this bar at 8:23 on a Thursday night when every professional instinct she had was telling her to move. Walt appeared at the edge of the table. He was holding a cloth that he did not appear to be using for anything, which was the sign of a man who needed to do something with his hands in order to say something with his mouth. "The cameras," he said. "I've been pulling the footage from tonight." Leah waited. "Owen," Walt said slowly. "He comes in every Thursday. He's been coming in every Thursday for 4 years. He paused. He never pays for his drinks." "Who does?" Leah asked. "Darren Voss has a corporate account here," Walt said. "He set it up 2 years ago. Said it was for client entertainment." Walt looked down at the cloth in his hands. "I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions." "You're asking them now," Leah said. He nodded, and something in his face shifted, not quite relief, but the first movement in that direction, the particular feeling of having been carrying a weight you told yourself was not heavy, and then finally setting it down and discovering how wrong you were. Officer Santos came back. She looked at Leah with the careful, measuring attention of a professional assessing another professional. "We're going to need a full statement," she said. "You'll have it," Leah said. "But you should also know that the footage Walt has is going to show you something specific about the timeline. The slap preceded the takedown by approximately 4 seconds, and there is no gap in the recording. Get all 3 cameras before anyone requests anything be deleted." Santos looked at her for a long beat. "You've done this before," she said. It was not quite a question. "Done what?" Leah said. "Given this kind of statement." "I've been in rooms where records mattered," Leah said simply. Santos nodded once and moved toward Walton Pike. From his stool at the bar, was watching Leah, with the careful concentration of a man who is revising his understanding of his situation and does not like what the revision is showing him. Leah met his gaze for exactly 1 second, long enough to register that she had looked. Not long enough to make it anything beyond neutral observation, and then she looked away. She pulled out her phone and sent a brief message to a task force number she had memorized 3 weeks ago. "Witness extraction complicated, moving to secondary asset. Warehouse 12 timeline accelerating. Need 24-hour surveillance authorization expedited." She put the phone away. Aaron Bell was watching her. "What happens next?" he said. "Tonight, nothing," Leah said. "Tonight, we let the police do their work, and we don't get in front of it. Tomorrow, you tell me everything you know about Warehouse 12. And we figure out how to find Miles Rowe before Owen Pike does. And if Owen moves the evidence tonight." "He won't," Leah said. "He still thinks he controls this. Men like Owen always believe in their own control right up until they don't have any left." She paused. "He also knows the police are watching him now, which means he can't move without calling attention to himself. He'll wait. He'll try to rebuild his narrative, first reframe what happened here tonight. Get out in front of the story. That's what he'll spend tonight doing." She was right about all of it. She was also by a margin so small she would not discover it until later. Wrong about one thing. Owen Pike did not go home that night. He went to his car in the Anchor House parking lot. And he called a number he did not often call, because calling it represented an acknowledgement that things were not under control, which was the one thing Owen Pike had never in his adult life been willing to acknowledge. The phone rang twice. "We have a problem," Owen said. The voice that answered was quiet and measured in the way of a person who has learned to receive bad news without visible reaction. Because visible reactions are information, and information is power, and power is the only thing worth protecting. "How big?" said Darren Voss. Owen looked through his windshield at the bar lights and the police vehicles and the distant shape of Leah Mercer, visible through the front window. Sitting still at her corner table, unhurried, unreachable. Patient as water. "I don't know yet," Owen said. "She's not what I thought she was." There was a silence. "Describe her to me," Voss said. Owen did. Another silence. Longer. "I'll make some calls," Voss said. "Don't go back inside. Don't talk to anyone else tonight. And Owen, find out who she is." Tonight, before morning. His voice did not change in pitch or texture, which was somehow worse than if it had. "Because if she's what I think she might be, we are not moving equipment. We are moving everything." Tonight, Owen ended the call. He sat in his car for 30 seconds. Then he started the engine. Inside the bar, Leah's phone vibrated once. She looked at the screen without picking it up. The message was from a number she did not recognize. And it contained a single line. "They know you're watching. Get out." She finished her water. She left cash on the table. She thanked Walt for the chowder. She said a brief word to Aaron Bell that sounded like goodbye, but was actually an agreement to meet the following morning at a diner 2 miles from the port at 7 a. She nodded to Officer Santos as she passed and provided a business card with a task force liaison number on it rather than her own name. She walked out the door without looking back. The night air was warm and thick with the particular weight of coastal humidity that always settled over Virginia Beach in late summer. The kind of air that felt like something was coming. Which it was a tropical depression, 3 days offshore that was being reclassified by the hour. She had 3 days, maybe less. She needed Miles Rowe. She needed his photographs, she needed Warehouse 12's operational records, and she needed to understand the full architecture of Darren Voss's supply chain manipulation, before the storm gave everyone an excuse to move cargo and ask questions later. She needed all of this, and she had a bruised jaw, a blown cover, and a contact who had not shown up. It was not the worst position she had ever operated from. She walked toward her car, and the port lights ahead of her were pale orange against the darkening sky. And, somewhere in the maze of warehouses and shipping containers, beyond the chain-link fence, the stolen generators that bore the name of a man she had loved and failed sat silent in the dark. Waiting to be found, she intended to find them. The diner on Tidewater Road smelled like coffee and bacon grease, and the particular kind of morning that arrives after a night. Nobody slept well. Aaron Bell was already in the corner booth when Leah walked in at 6:58, 2 minutes early, which meant he had been there considerably longer than that. He had a mug in front of him and a folded napkin on which he had been writing in the careful, compressed handwriting of someone trained to put a lot of information into a small spaces. He slid the napkin across the table without preamble. Leah sat down and read it. Warehouse 12, Secondary Access Gate. East Side. Coded entry changed last Thursday, which was the same day Miles Rowe had stopped showing up for his shift. Night shift rotation, 4 guards, 2 of whom reported directly to Owen Pike and had for the past 18 months. Loading dock cameras, 4 visible, minimum 2 blind spots on the northwest corner, based on where the junction boxes were positioned. Cargo manifests filed with the Port Authority, 3 separate shipments in the last 6 weeks, listed as agricultural equipment. Inbound from a logistics company based in Chesapeake, whose registered address turned out to be a mail forwarding service. Leah looked up. "When did you pull the address on the logistics company?" she asked. "Last night," Aaron said. "After you left. I couldn't sleep." "You ran that yourself?" "I know a retired JAG officer who knows a maritime records clerk who owes him a favor." Aaron wrapped both hands around his mug. "The company was registered 14 months ago. The sole listed officer is a man named Raymond Caulfield. Raymond Caulfield's previous employer, before he went into business for himself, was Darren Voss's primary shipping operation." Leah absorbed this without expression. 14 months ago, which meant the infrastructure for this theft had been in place well before the emergency supplies were ever purchased, contracted, or shipped. Someone had anticipated the contract. Someone had known, before the government had finalized the paperwork, that a large order of generators and medical equipment was coming through Tidewater Port on its way to a veterans rehabilitation center, and they had built the mechanism to intercept it at least a year in advance. That was not opportunism, that was architecture. Who at the Port Authority had advanced knowledge of the Heart Center contract? Leah said. That's the question, Aaron said. The waitress arrived. Leah ordered coffee. She was not hungry, but she ordered toast because her body needed fuel, and she had learned, long ago, that allowing herself to run empty because she was too focused to eat was the kind of thing that made good operators into preventable casualties. She ate without tasting it while Aaron talked, and she listened with the full, precise attention that she gave to everything that mattered, not just hearing the words but tracking the pauses between them, the order in which he chose to deliver information, the things he said in passing that he probably didn't realize were significant. He had been watching Tidewater Port for 2 years. Not officially, not as anything other than a retired man with time and habits, and a particular inability to stop paying attention to things that didn't add up. He had noticed the pattern of certain cargo manifests being amended after filing a minor procedural irregularity that most people would dismiss as clerical error, but that Aaron Bell, who had spent a career in environments where paperwork was the difference between accountability and impunity, had recognized as something more deliberate. He had written it down. He had dated his notes. He had 4 months of documented observations in a folder on his kitchen table that he had not taken to the Port Authority because he did not yet know which people in the Port Authority could be trusted, which was itself a piece of intelligence. Leah looked at him across the table and thought, this man has been building a case. He has been doing it alone and without resources and without any expectation that anyone would eventually show up to receive it. She thought about how long 4 months was to carry something like that by yourself. Witrid, not all at once, and then she thought about 8 months, which was how long she had carried Benjamin Hart's death before she understood that carrying it was not the same as honoring it. I need that folder, she said. I know, he said. I brought it. He put a manila envelope on the table. Leah opened it and began to read, and she did not stop reading for 22 minutes. During which Aaron Bell drank his coffee and refilled it himself when the waitress didn't come back and said nothing, because he understood without being told that this was not the moment for conversation. When she finished, she closed the envelope and sat quietly for a moment. This is enough to get the surveillance authorization upgraded, she said. This plus what Miles Rowe has, if we can get to Miles, gives us the documentary spine of a federal case. Where is Miles? Aaron said. Tessa said he was safe. She didn't say where. Leah put the envelope in her bag. I need to talk to Tessa again. Without Owen knowing, I talked to her, which was complicated, because Owen Pike had spent the night doing exactly what Leah had predicted, and one thing she had not. She found out about the second thing when her task force contact called at 8:17. His name was Ray Damaris, and he had the voice of a man who had delivered bad news often enough to have developed a particular economy of language around it. He said the necessary thing and then stopped. What he said was this: someone had filed a complaint overnight with the Federal Maritime Task Force's Oversight Board, alleging that an operative connected to the task force had conducted an unauthorized physical assault on a port security employee at a civilian establishment in Virginia Beach. The complaint had been filed by a legal representative acting on behalf of Darren Voss's shipping company. It identified Leah Mercer by name and included a 17-second video clip that began mid-confrontation, showing Leah's wrist capture and takedown without any preceding footage. The Oversight Board had flagged it for review. Pending that review, Leah's operational access to task force resources was suspended. She sat with the phone against her ear, and she did not say anything for a moment. Who did they get the clip from? She said. Owen Pike's personal phone, Ray said. He uploaded it publicly at 11:42 last night. It's been shared 11,000 times. He edited it. We know. Walt at the Anchor House is cooperating, and Officer Santos has the full security footage in evidence. But the oversight process doesn't move as fast as viral video. Ray's voice was careful. You're not suspended from the investigation. You're suspended from task force resource access pending review. Which means I'm doing this on my own until the review clears, Leah said. Leah, how long is the review? A pause. 48 to 72 hours. Assuming the board moves quickly. 48 to 72 hours. She looked out the diner window. The sky was the particular heavy gray-white of a coast that knows weather is coming. The tropical depression had been upgraded to a named storm during the night. Landfall projection 72 hours, possibly fewer. The review window and the storm window were almost exactly the same size. What about the surveillance authorization I requested? She said. On hold pending review, Ray said. She ended the call. Aaron was watching her. She put the phone down on the table and looked at it for a moment. And then she looked at Aaron, and she told him what Ray had told her. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he did what she had come to understand was his characteristic response to receiving complicated information. He was quiet for exactly as long as it took him to think about it. And then he spoke. So he cut the footage, Aaron said. He cut the footage and posted it. 11,000 shares as of 8 a.m. Leah said. The story he's telling publicly is that an unstable woman attacked him without provocation in a bar. He's framing it as a safety issue for port employees who work in the community. Who's going to believe that? Some people. Enough to create noise. She picked up her coffee. That's the point. He doesn't need everyone to believe it. He needs enough doubt to slow down the investigation while he moves the evidence. If my operational access is suspended for 48 hours, that's 48 hours he can use. Aaron's jaw tightened. He's smarter than he looks. He didn't think of it himself, Leah said. Voss did. Owen made the call last night. Voss built the legal strategy before morning. She set the mug down. We need Tessa. And we need her to tell us how to reach Miles without going through any channel Owen can monitor. Tessa Rowe, as it turned out, had not been waiting to be found. She was waiting outside the diner. She was wearing a different jacket than the night before, and she had her hair down. And she was holding her phone in a two-handed grip that told Leah she had been standing there for a while, working up to something. When Leah came out and stopped in front of her, Tessa took a breath and said, Without any lead-in, they fired me this morning. Leah felt something tighten in her chest. Who called the Port Authority HR line at 7 a.m.? Tessa's voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when the person has decided that falling apart is not going to be useful. They said it was a performance review issue. They said there had been complaints about my behavior. They have a file. She shook her head. Owen built a file. I don't know how long he's been building it, but it exists. And it says I'm unreliable and confrontational, and apparently that's enough. Leah looked at her steadily. Did they give you paperwork? They emailed it. Forward it to me. All of it. The termination notice, any prior documentation, anything in writing. She gave Tessa an address. That file is evidence of witness retaliation. The more detailed it is, the better it is for us. Tessa stared at her. You're saying him firing me helps you. I'm saying everything Owen does from this point forward is either evidence against him or a mistake he's making in plain sight. Usually both. Leah paused. Where is Miles? Something shifted in Tessa's face. It was not hesitation. It was the calculation of a person deciding how much trust the situation has earned. Leah did not press it. She let the silence do its work. Because silence, in her experience, was a more effective tool than any question she could ask. He's at our cousin Danny's place, Tessa said finally. In Chesapeake. He hasn't left the apartment in 9 days. He won't answer calls from numbers he doesn't know. He barely answers mine. She looked at the ground and then back up. He's scared. Not just of Owen. He's scared that if he comes forward and it goes wrong, it'll destroy him. He's 26 years old, and he doesn't have a criminal record, and he doesn't want one. And he's convinced that somehow this will end with him being the one who gets in trouble. That's not an irrational fear, Leah said. Tessa blinked. It's based on a pattern he's observed, Leah continued. People who have power protect each other, and people who challenge that power tend to pay a price even when they're right. Miles has watched that happen. His fear is not weakness. It's pattern recognition, she paused. I'm going to need you to call him. Not to convince him to do anything, just to tell him that someone is coming to talk to him, and that person is not going to ask him to be brave in ways that put him at risk. Are you that person? Tessa said. Yes, Leah said. Aaron had come out of the diner behind her and was standing slightly back. Near enough to hear, far enough to signal that the conversation belonged to the two of them. Tessa glanced at him and back at Leah. Who are you? Tessa said. I mean, really. Last night I saw what you did to Owen. And the way the police talk to you, and the way you talk. She shook her head. You're not a safety consultant. I was, Leah said. Before that I was something else. What? Leah considered her. Tessa had lost her job this morning. She had been targeted, documented, and discarded by a system that was supposed to be accountable. And she was still standing outside a diner in the early morning, with her phone in her hands, looking for a way to help her brother. That kind of steadiness deserved something better than evasion. Navy, Leah said. Special operations for 9 years. Tessa absorbed this. Her expression did not go to awe, it went to relief, which was the more intelligent response. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll call Miles. The call happened in the parking lot, and Leah did not listen to it. She moved away to give Tessa space, and she stood with Aaron, and they talked quietly about the logistics of what came next. She needed to get to Miles in Chesapeake before Voss's people identified him as the missing witness. She needed the phone in Miles's locker at Warehouse 12 without triggering the cameras that Owen controlled. She needed to maintain contact with Officer Santos, and Detective Caleb Brooks. Aaron had mentioned Brooks as someone worth trusting, a former Navy corpsman who had joined the force after his second deployment, and who had a reputation for doing things by the book even when the book was inconvenient. Brooks is the one who got involved after you left last night, Aaron said. Santos called him when she realized what the footage showed. He's been running down the bar record independently. He's not going to arrest you. Good, Leah said. Because I'm going to need him. Caleb Brooks arrived at the diner 30 minutes later in a civilian car, wearing civilian clothes, which told Leah that he had made a choice about the nature of this particular meeting before he go out there. He was a lean, quiet man, with the kind of face that had been weathered by things other than sun, and he had steady dark eyes that moved around a room the way Leah's did, cataloging, prioritizing, settling. He sat down across from her and Aaron, and he put a tablet on the table with the security footage from the anchor house pulled up, paused on the frame where Owen's hand was mid-swing toward Leah's face. I've got the full recording, he said. All 3 cameras synchronized. The slap is unambiguous. His intent to strike again is unambiguous. Your response was proportional and controlled, and you released him the moment he stopped resisting. He looked at her. Whoever filed the complaint with your task force oversight board sent them only the clip Owen posted. I know, Leah said. The board will clear you, Brooks said, but not in 48 hours. Probably 72. Maybe more if Voss's lawyers file supplemental materials, which they will. He folded his hands on the table. I'm running a parallel criminal investigation through the city. Owen faces assault charges, regardless of what happens to you operationally. But the bigger picture, the stolen supplies, the Voss connection, the manifest manipulation, that's federal and that's yours. He paused. What do you need from me? Witness protection for Miles Rowe, Leah said. Informal. I need him visible enough to feel safe, and invisible enough that Owen can't find him before we're ready to use his testimony. Brooks nodded slowly. I can do that, and I need someone to walk Tessa through her rights around the wrongful termination. She needs to understand that cooperating with a federal investigation shields her from the kind of HR retaliation Owen just used against her. I know a victim advocate with the city, Brooks said. She's good. And I need to know if Voss has any contacts inside the Port Authority's administrative division. Specifically anyone with advance access to federal supply contracts. Brooks was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality, measured. Careful, the particular quality of a person who is about to say something that requires trust on both sides. There's a Port Authority administrator named Ellen Marsh. She's been flagged in 2 separate internal audits for irregularities in contract documentation. Both audits were closed without finding. One of the auditors who closed the first one retired 6 months later on a pension that didn't quite match his salary history. Leah looked at him. I've been watching it, Brooks said simply, for almost a year. But watching and proving are different things. Ellen Marsh, Leah said. She had advance access to the Heart Center contract. She processed the initial procurement paperwork, Brooks said. Yes. And there it was, the point at which the map of the thing became clear. Not all of it, not the fine details, but the architecture. Voss had a contact inside the Port Authority who had flagged the Heart Center contract. The logistics shell company had been built to intercept the shipment. Owen had been the on-the-ground mechanism, using his warehouse authority to divert and relabel the equipment. Miles Rowe had seen the relabeling and made the mistake of photographing it. And then the entire weight of a corrupt system had been brought to bear on a 26-year-old cargo clerk whose only crime was that he had not looked away when he should have. Leah thought about Benjamin Hart, who had also not looked away when he should have. She pushed the thought down. This was not the moment. Tessa came back from the parking lot. Her face had changed. She had been crying. Briefly, the kind that happens fast and then stops because you don't let it do anything else. She sat down beside Leah and said, "He'll talk to you." Leah drove to Chesapeake alone. She had offered to bring Aaron or Brooks and turned down her own offer because Miles Rowe was a frightened young man who had spent 9 days alone in his cousin's apartment, convincing himself that everyone who came through the door represented a threat. And showing up with multiple people would read as pressure even when it was intended as support. Danny Rowe's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like laundry detergent and old carpet. And Miles opened the door on the 4th knock, and he looked exactly the way Leah had expected him to look. Thin in a way that meant he hadn't been eating, pale in a way that meant he hadn't been sleeping. With eyes that went immediately to the hallway behind her to check that she was alone. She was Miles, she said. "My name is Leah Mercer. I'm working with a federal maritime task force. I'm not here to put you in front of anyone. I'm here to listen." He let her in. He told her everything in the careful, fragmented way of someone who has been rehearsing a story in their head for so long that it has become almost disconnected from the feeling of it. The medical containers. The workers with the heat guns. Methodically removing serial number plates and replacing them with new ones. The manifests that didn't match the physical cargo. He had photographed it over 3 separate days before he was certain of what he was seeing. He had not wanted to be wrong, because he had understood even then that being wrong about something like this was dangerous in ways that being right was also dangerous. He had taken 31 photographs. They were on a phone in a waterproof case in his locker at Warehouse 12. Locker number 44, combination 18731, which he had not been back to retrieve, because the last time he had gone to the warehouse, Owen Pike had been standing at the entrance. "He didn't touch me," Miles said. "He just looked at me for a long time, and then he said." Miles stopped. He pressed his hands together on the table. He said, "Your sister works at the Anchor House, right?" And then he walked away. The room was quiet for a moment. "That was a threat," Leah said. "Not as a question, as a confirmation. Offered to a person who needed to hear their own interpretation, validated by someone who understood these things." "Yeah," Miles said, "I know. I knew then, that's why I left." "You did the right thing," Leah said. "Leaving when you did protected you, and it protected Tessa." She paused. "I need the photographs, Miles. I also need you to walk me through what you saw. In detail, because your memory of it is as important as the images." "And then what?" he said. "After I do that, what happens to me?" You'll be placed under formal witness protection, coordinated with the city police, Leah said. Detective Brooks is handling that personally. You'll have legal representation, provided by the federal task force for the duration of the case. You will not be required to appear in any public proceeding without advance notice and full support. Miles looked at her. He was 26 years old, and he was frightened, and he was sitting in his cousin's apartment because he had done the right thing, and the right thing had cost him his job, his routine, his sleep, and 9 days of his life. He had every reason to say no. He had every reason to tell her that he had already paid enough, that this was not his responsibility, that someone else should carry it. My dad was a veteran, Miles said. He used to talk about the Heart Center. He said it was the first place that actually helped him. He looked down at the table. Those generators were for the people in there, weren't they? Yes, Leah said. Then let's get the phone, Miles said. Getting the phone meant getting inside Warehouse 12 without Owen Pike knowing it was happening, which meant it could not happen in daylight, which meant Leah had hours to fill and a plan to build. She spent them the way she had spent every waiting period in her operational career, preparing, not resting, running contingencies in a mind that was constitutionally unable to be truly still when there was a problem in front of it. She also spent 40 minutes of those hours on a call she had not expected to make. Gerald Holt called her. He called from a number she didn't recognize. And he spoke fast and low, in the voice of someone who is standing somewhere they believe is being watched. He had not come to the Anchor House the previous night because he had seen Owen's car in the parking lot when he pulled in, and he had driven past without stopping. He had been trying to reach the task force general line since midnight. What he had, beyond the information she already knew he had, was a name she did not, a freight broker who had personally coordinated the manifest amendments across all 4 months of irregular filings. A freight broker who had met with Owen Pike on 3 separate occasions at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the port. A freight broker whose name appeared on the registration documents of the Chesapeake Logistics Shell Company as a secondary contact. The name was not Raymond Cofield. The name was Ellen Marsh. Leah sat very still on the edge of Miles's cousin's couch when she heard it. The Port Authority Administrator, the woman who had processed the procurement paperwork for the Heart Center contract. She was not just a passive conduit for Voss's information, she was an active participant in the falsification of the shipping records. She was the architect of the paper trail that had made the theft look, to any casual inspection, like legitimate commerce. And she was currently sitting in an office at the Tidewater Port Authority building with access to every document related to the federal investigation that had been filed through official channels, which meant she knew exactly what the task force had. And she had been sharing it. Leah called Brooks. Ellen Marsh, she said when he picked up. A pause. What about her? She's not just compromised. She's running the documentation side of the operation. She's the freight broker connection. Leah was standing now, moving without realizing it. She has access to the task force's official filings. She knows our paper trail. Brooks was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, if she knows what we've filed officially, she knows the gaps. Yes, which means she's been feeding Voss information on what we have and what we're still missing. Another pause. Longer, Leah. If she knows the task force has been looking at Warehouse 12, they're going to move the evidence, Leah said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She could hear Brooks processing this, the quick breath, the shift of weight, the particular sound of a careful man deciding how fast he needs to move. I need to get a warrant, he said. You have 48 hours of documented surveillance irregularities from Aaron Bell. Witness testimony from Gerald Holt, identifying Marsh by name as the broker connection, and Miles Rowe, willing to walk you through 31 photographs the moment we retrieve that phone. She kept her voice level. How long does the warrant take? If I go to Judge Hensley, who owes me nothing but is scrupulously honest, 4 hours, Brooks said. Maybe 3. Get it, Leah said. I'm going in for the phone tonight. I need you to have the arrest paperwork ready the moment I have proof of the serial number manipulation in my hand. Going in tonight means going without task force authorization, Brooks said. I'm aware, Leah Caleb. She used his first name deliberately. The storm makes landfall in approximately 60 hours. The evidence disappears in less than that if Marsh tips them off tonight. The generators that were supposed to reach the Benjamin Hart Veterans Recovery Center are sitting in a warehouse that a corrupt port supervisor controls. And the people at that center are running on backup systems that weren't designed for a sustained outage. She stopped. I am not asking you to do anything unauthorized. I am asking you to move as fast as the law allows while I do something adjacent to it. A long silence. 4 hours, Brooks said. I'll have the warrant in 4 hours. Don't go in before I confirm. Agreed, she said. She ended the call and looked at Miles, who had been listening from the doorway of the small kitchen with the focused attention of someone who is understanding for the first time the full scale of what he had stumbled into. How long have they been planning this? He said. At least 14 months, Leah said. Possibly longer. All of that, he said. All of that for stolen generators. Not just generators, Leah said. $48,000 in portable medical units. $62,000 in emergency rescue supplies. $112,000 in generator equipment intended for a facility that houses veterans with serious medical needs. She looked at him steadily. And a cover-up that involved falsifying federal shipping records, bribing or blackmailing a Port Authority administrator, using a port security supervisor to intimidate witnesses, and filing false complaints against a federal operative. She paused. When you add all of that together, it's not about the equipment anymore. It's about the belief that the right people can steal from anyone they want, and the wrong kind of witnesses will always stay quiet. Miles Rowe looked at her for a long moment. I'm not that kind of witness, he said. No, Leah said. You're not. Outside, the sky was getting heavier by the hour, and somewhere over the Atlantic, the storm had a name now, and a direction and a speed. And it was moving toward the Virginia coast with the patient, indifferent momentum of something that did not care at all about the things happening in its path. Leah felt it, the way she always felt incoming weather, not in the air but in the back of her neck, in the calibrated internal clock that had never quite stopped running since the Navy. The one that counted down to things whether she asked it to or not. 60 hours, maybe 58 now. She sat down across from Miles Rowe and took out a notepad and said, Tell me everything you remember about the serial numbers. Every detail, the shape of the plates, the tools they used, the order they worked in, the time of day, the lighting. She clicked the pen. Leave nothing out. He began to talk and she began to write. And the clock in the back of her head kept running. Quiet and precise, the way it always did when everything was about to move at once. Brooks called at 11:47 with 3 words. Warrant is signed. Leah was already in position. She had spent the 4 hours between her call with Brooks and his confirmation doing what she did best in the space before action, not resting, not pacing, but moving through the operational picture with the methodical patience of someone who understands that the quality of a plan is measured by what it accounts for when things go wrong. She had walked the perimeter of the Tidewater port twice in the dark, not close enough to trigger the external cameras, far enough back to read the layout the way you read a room exits. Angles, blind spots, the places where light failed, and the places where it was too deliberate not to mean something. Aaron had given her the blind spot coordinates from memory, and they were accurate. The northwest corner of Warehouse 12 had a 40-foot gap in camera coverage, where 2 junction boxes had been installed at the wrong height during a renovation 3 years ago. Nobody had corrected it because the oversight committee that should have noticed it was chaired by a man who reported to Darren Voss. She had also mapped the fuel line routing from the port's maintenance records, which Aaron had obtained through his JAG-E contact before going dark for the evening. The records mattered because the storm was coming, And because a flooded loading complex with compromised fuel lines was not a situation she intended to walk into blind. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and moved. The East Gate code had changed the previous Thursday, but Miles had given her the override sequence for the maintenance access panel, a legacy code that Port Authority maintenance workers used, and that nobody had thought to change because it was not listed in the standard security documentation. It was listed in a supplemental manual that Miles had read twice, because he was the kind of person who read supplemental manuals. And that thoroughness had cost him 9 days of his life, and was now about to help recover everything the theft had taken from people far more vulnerable than him. The code worked. She was inside. Warehouse 12 at midnight had the particular quality of large industrial spaces after hours, a dense, pressurized silence broken by the sounds of settling metal and the distant mechanical hum of refrigeration units running on the far west wall. She moved through it the way she had moved through 100 similar spaces, with the compressed, efficient stillness of someone who has learned that the difference between detection and invisibility is rarely about speed. It is about occupying space as though you belong in it, which is a posture, not a speed. Locker 44 was in the workers' annex off the main floor. She found it in 90 seconds, hit the combination Miles had given her on the first try, and found the phone in its waterproof case, exactly where Miles had said it would be. Wrapped in a spare work shirt, pushed to the back behind a pair of steel-toed boots. She held it for a moment. It was a cheap model, the kind of phone a 26-year-old cargo clerk buys on a prepaid plan because it is reliable and the monthly cost doesn't hurt. Miles had taken 31 photographs on this phone over 3 days. He had risked his safety and his livelihood and 9 days of his life for what was on this device, and he had done it because he had looked at those medical containers and understood that someone going to need them, and someone was taking them. And he had decided that this was not something he could see and walk away from. She powered it on. The screen came up. The photographs were there. She plugged in the small encrypted transfer device she carried and began the upload. It was during the 40 seconds of the upload that she heard the vehicles. Not one, multiple. Coming from the South Access Road, which meant from the port's internal road network rather than the public entrance, which meant port authorization, which meant someone inside the authority had cleared them in. She heard 3 engines, 2 heavy, 1 lighter, and she heard them stop near the main loading entrance of Warehouse 12. And then she heard voices, not many, 4, maybe 5. And above the voices, carrying in the way that particular sounds carry in large metal spaces. She heard Owen Pike. He was not happy, but he was moving with purpose, which was more dangerous than anger alone. She completed the upload. She pocketed the phone and the transfer device, and she moved, not toward the maintenance exit she had entered through, because that was now between her and the vehicles, but toward the interior of the warehouse further in, not out, which was the counterintuitive choice that training produced and instinct argued against. She went deeper, and she used the first 20 seconds of that movement to send a single compressed message to Brooks. They're moving Warehouse 12. Multiple vehicles, go now. Then she put the phone away and she listened. Owen's voice was giving instructions in the tight, slightly elevated register of a man operating under pressure that he is trying to disguise as authority. She could hear the specific texture of the anxiety underneath it, the way his sentences ran slightly faster than his normal cadence, the way he repeated certain instructions twice as though he did not quite trust the people receiving them. He was directing men to the northeast section of the warehouse, which was where, according to the manifest records she had studied, the relabeled medical containers had been staged for what the falsified paperwork described as secondary shipping inspection. She moved parallel to their direction, not to intercept, to observe, because she needed to know exactly what they were moving and in what configuration before Brooks arrived, because that information would determine how the arrest went and what could be documented in real time. She heard a door open ahead of her, then a second voice lower. more measured, the voice of someone who is giving orders rather than receiving them. She had not heard this voice before, but she recognized its quality immediately. This was not Owen Pike. This was someone who was used to being obeyed by people like Owen Pike. Darren Voss had come himself. She went very still. The fact that Voss was personally present at a late-night evidence relocation inside a compromised warehouse meant one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever Ellen Marsh had told him about the investigation, it had frightened him enough to abandon the intermediary structure he had spent 14 months building. Voss was not a man who exposed himself. The shell company, the forged manifests, the use of Owen as an operational layer, all of it existed, so that Voss could maintain distance between his name and the crime. The fact that he was here now, at midnight, 2 days before a major storm, meant he believed the distance had already collapsed. He knew the task force was close, which meant he also knew that moving the evidence tonight was not about completing a theft. It was about survival. She counted 8 men total from the sounds of movement and voice. Voss and Owen. 2 she assessed as Voss's personal security from the way they moved quieter than the others, positioned rather than directed. 4 laborers who were there to load cargo and who almost certainly did not know the full scope of what they were handling. They began to move containers. She tracked the movement by sound and used it to build a picture of the configuration she already had from the manifest records. 4 large generator units, 11 portable medical crates, 7 equipment cases of emergency rescue supplies. The total weight of it was significant. They were using an electric pallet mover, which made less noise than a forklift and left less of a signature on the port's fuel consumption records. Voss had thought about this. She was 20 feet from the northeast section, behind a row of legitimate agricultural shipping containers that provided both cover and a sightline to the activity, when her phone vibrated once with a message from Brooks. ETA 12 minutes. Tactical support 4 minutes behind. Hold position. 12 minutes. She could hold position for 12 minutes. She had held positions in worse circumstances for longer periods with less certainty about what was coming to relieve her. Then she heard the sound that changed everything. It was not from the northeast section. It came from somewhere behind her, from the direction of the south loading dock, the part of the warehouse closest to the internal water channel. It was a human sound, compressed and frightened, the sound of someone who has just made a mistake large enough to hear. Tessa's voice. Immediately after Tessa, run. Leah was moving before the second word finished. She did not run. Running in a dark industrial space with unknown obstacles and multiple hostile actors is how people die. She moved fast and low and precisely, following the acoustic trail of the sound, back through the warehouse toward the loading dock. And she understood, in the first 5 seconds, what had happened. Tessa and Miles had come. They had not been able to stay away. Tessa had gotten a message probably from Holt, possibly from someone else in the chain, that Owen was moving tonight. And she had come with Miles because Miles had known the layout and because neither of them had been able to make themselves sit in an apartment in Chesapeake while the evidence that could explain 9 days of terror was being loaded onto a freight vehicle. She found them in the stairwell leading to the dock level. Miles had his back against the wall, and Tessa was in front of him. And they were both completely still in the way of people who have just heard something much closer than they expected. Owen had found them. He had not seen them yet. She could hear him 10 feet from the stairwell door, speaking to someone on his phone, but he was close enough that any sound from the stairwell would bring him directly to them. Leah came down the last 3 steps without a sound and put herself between them and the door. She held up one hand palm flat, fingers spread the universal signal for stop moving and stay still. And she held Miles's eyes until she saw him absorb it and go deliberately, consciously still in a way that was different from the frozen stillness of panic. "He's coming this way," Tessa breathed. Barely sound at all. "I know," Leah said at the same volume. "How did you get in?" "Miles knew a maintenance door," Tessa said. "On the south side. We came to..." She stopped. We were going to try to upload the photographs ourselves. Before they moved everything. I already have them, Leah said. Miles closed his eyes briefly. Tessa let out a slow breath. The backup recording system, Miles said. The one for the dock level. It's been running. Tessa found the access panel when we came in. She activated it. Leah looked at Tessa. I used to work the dock level during our job, Tessa said. 2 years ago. I remembered where the emergency recording backup was. It goes to an off-site server. It's required for fire safety compliance. So they can't delete it without taking down the whole system. For a moment, Leah was simply quiet, looking at this young woman who had lost her job this morning and driven to a compromised warehouse in the middle of the night and had still, in the middle of her own fear, had the clarity of mind to activate the one recording system that Owen Pike could not touch. You just documented everything they've moved in the last hour, Leah said. Yes, Tessa said. Including Vo said. Yes, Owen's voice had stopped. His footsteps had not. He was moving toward the stairwell. Leah made the assessment in approximately 1.5 seconds. The door was going to open in 4 or 5 steps. She could not get Tessa and Miles out of the stairwell before it did. She could not hold it from this side without Owen knowing someone was there. What she could do was the thing she had done once before at a tactical disadvantage, which was to decide what the environment offered and use it before Owen had time to decide the same. She stepped forward, past the stairwell door, into the space just beyond it. She positioned herself flat against the wall to its side in the precise spot that would put her behind the door as it opened outward. She looked back at Tessa and Miles and made a small, sharp gesture. Up the stairs. Now move. They moved. They were quiet. Miles was better at it than she had expected. He had the particular physical economy of someone who has spent years working in spaces where you learn to carry yourself without excess. The door opened. Owen came through. He was looking at his phone and he was moving fast. And he had gotten 3 steps past the door before his body registered what his mind hadn't processed yet, the presence of another person in the space. And he turned. Leah was already at his shoulder. She did not give him time to shout. She controlled the arm that was holding the phone, applied the lock that took his balance, and walked him sideways into the wall in a movement that made minimal sound and left him controlled and upright and unable to generate enough leverage to pull free. Where is Voss? She said. Quiet, direct. Go to. She adjusted the grip. Not painfully precisely. Loading platform, Owen said. Through his teeth. Main level. How many with him? He didn't answer. Owen. She kept her voice level. The building's backup recording system is active. Everything on this dock has been documented to an off-site server that your employer cannot touch. The warrant for this warehouse was signed 2 hours ago. Detective Brooks and a tactical team are 4 minutes out. She paused. Your choices are narrowing very fast. I'm offering you the chance to narrow them in a direction that works in your favor. He was breathing hard. She could feel the calculation running through him, the old calculations of a man who has always believed in his own leverage. Now running against an inventory of leverage that was suddenly, catastrophically depleted. Voss has a boat, Owen said. On the freight dock. 40-footer. He was planning to be gone before anyone showed up. Where is the boat registered? Shell Company. Same as the logistics operation. He paused. He's been planning it. If anything went wrong, he was going to load what he could and go. The boat's been sitting at that dock for 3 weeks. Leah released him. She stepped back. Owen turned to look at her. His face had been through too many things in the past 18 hours to settle on any single expression. There was rage in it. And calculation. And underneath both of those, something she recognized as the very early stages of a man beginning to understand that the story he has been living in was not the story he thought it was. You should sit down, Leah said. Right here. Don't move. When the officers come through that door in approximately 4 minutes, put your hands where they can see them and tell them your name. And then what? He said. And then, she said, you start making better choices than you've been making. She left him there, and she went for the stairs. Brooks came through the main entrance with 6 officers at 11 minutes from his first message, which was 1 minute better than his estimate, and Leah had used the 11 minutes to do 2 things. The first was to get Tessa and Miles to the building's secondary fire exit, where she secured them in the exterior stairwell, with instructions to stay put and to call Brooks directly if anything came through the door that wasn't uniformed law enforcement. The second was to get to the loading platform before Voss reached his boat. She came out onto the loading platform from the interior dock access stairs, and she had the layout from the maintenance records, and she had counted Voss's probable pace from the time she left Owen, and she had estimated correctly Voss was 30 feet from the exterior freight dock entrance. Moving fast, one of his 2 personal security personnel slightly ahead of him and one slightly behind. He saw her. He stopped. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the loading platform. And Leah thought, this is what 14 months of careful architecture looks like when it finally has a face. Darren Voss was a compact man in his 50s with the manicured appearance of someone who has spent a long time ensuring that nothing about his exterior conveys anything other than respectability. Even now, even in this moment, he was wearing a collared shirt under his jacket. He looked like a man at a business meeting. He had spent his entire professional life looking like a man at a business meeting. Ms. Mercer. He knew her name. Of course he did, Marsh had told him. Mr. Voss, she said. The security man in front of him took a step toward her. Don't, she said, and she said it in the same tone she used for everything level. Precise, not loud, but there was something in it that the security man's body understood before his brain finished processing the word. Because he stopped. You don't have authorization to be here, Voss said. Your operational access was suspended. My task force access was suspended, Leah said. Detective Brooks's warrant is not mine, and his team is coming through the main entrance right now. She tilted her head slightly. Listen. He listened. The sound of the tactical team moving through the warehouse was not loud, it was a distributed, purposeful sound, the sound of people who know how to move through a space and are doing it efficiently, but in the particular silence of an industrial building at midnight, it carried. Voss heard it. She saw it in his face, the small, involuntary calculation of distance and options, and then the arrival at the conclusion that the calculation had been reaching for several minutes and that he had been refusing to acknowledge. The boat was not going to happen. The recording system, Leah said. Dock level. It's been running since approximately 10 minutes after you arrived tonight. She let that land. Everything you've moved, every instruction you've given, every container, documented to a server you can't reach. Voss was quiet for a long moment. The security man in front of him had not moved. The one behind him was doing the same calculation Voss was doing and arriving at the same place. The woman who activated it, Voss said. The waitress. Yes, Leah said. He looked at her, and she saw something cross his face that was almost respect. Not for her, she knew. For the situation. For the specificity of the failure. He was a man who appreciated architecture, and he had just recognized that the architecture that had undone him was not federal investigation or tactical response. It was a 23-year-old waitress who had worked a summer job on a dock 2 years ago and had remembered where the backup recording panel was. She's going to be fine, Leah said. So is her brother. Brooks came through the platform door with 2 officers, and he was breathing slightly hard from moving quickly, but his face was absolutely composed. And he looked at the scene, Leah, Voss, the 2 security men, the loaded pallet mover visible through the interior dock entrance, and he assessed it in the 3 seconds of a man who has done this enough times to read a room by its human architecture rather than its physical one. Darren Voss, Brooks said. You are under arrest. The security men stepped aside without instruction. Leah moved back, out of the frame, which was where she belonged. At this point, she had gotten them here. And from here, it was Brooks's work, and she understood the difference between those 2 things, with the precision of someone who has spent a career learning exactly where her role ended. She walked back through the interior of the warehouse. She passed Owen Pike, who was sitting exactly where she had left him. Hands visible, phone on the floor beside him, looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who is trying to locate, in the inventory of his life choices, the specific one that put him in this position. 2 officers reached him seconds after Leah passed. She went to the fire exit stairwell and opened the door. Tessa and Miles were sitting on the exterior stairs, close together, the way siblings sit when they are scared and trying not to show each other how scared they are. They both looked up when the door opened, and Tessa made a sound that was not quite a word when she saw that it was Leah. "Is it over?" Tessa said. "This part," Leah said. Miles stood up. He looked steadier than he had in the apartment in Chesapeake, which was the particular steadiness that comes not from fear resolving, from action, replacing it from having done something instead of endured something. "The photographs," he said. "The phone, safe," Leah said. She held up the transfer device. "Everything's on this. Encrypted. Chain of custody documented from the moment I powered on the phone." She looked at him. "You did this, Miles. Not me. The photographs you took. The risk you took taking them. That is the center of this case." Miles looked at the transfer device for a moment. He opened his mouth and closed it again, and then he looked away. And Leah gave him that moment without filling it, because she understood that some things needed to land completely before a person could speak around them. "Come on," she said gently. "Brooks needs your statements while the timeline is clean." They went back inside. The next 3 hours had the particular texture of aftermath, the organized, purposeful work of documentation and arrest and evidence cataloging that follows the thing everyone thinks of as the story, but that is in fact the foundation of everything that comes next. Leah gave her statement to a federal liaison who arrived at 1:15 a.m. with the particular alert quality of someone who has been briefed in transit. Miles gave his statement with the assistance of a victim advocate that Brooks had called in personally. Tessa walked 2 officers through the dock recording system and the activation sequence and the location of the off-site server access, and she did it with a clarity and precision that made one of the officers stop mid-note and look at her and say, "You've been carrying this whole thing, haven't you?" And Tessa said, "No, Miles carried it. I just helped hold the door." Gerald Holt arrived at 2 a.m. He had driven from where he had been hiding for 6 days, a motel in Norfolk. It turned out 12 miles from the bar where he had failed to appear, and he looked exhausted and ashamed and relieved in equal and complicated measure. He took Leah's hand when he saw her and said, "I should have come sooner," and she said, "You're here now," and that was all either of them said about it. Ellen Marsh was arrested at her home in Portsmouth at 2:47 a.m. She had been notified by a call from Voss's lawyer. It was later determined, placed in the 7 minutes between Voss's arrest and the lawyer's own tintunch, and she had been in the process of destroying documents when the officers arrived. The documents she had not yet destroyed included a 14-month correspondence with Raymond Caulfield and 3 years of falsified contract records going back to well before the Heart Center shipment. She had been doing this for a long time. Brooks found Leah outside the warehouse at 3:15, standing in the cool air that had started coming off the water in the last hour, the advance signature of the storm. Still 2 days out, but already changing the atmosphere. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking, which was the kind of thing people did when the work was done and the words hadn't caught up yet. "The generators," Leah said. "Will they make it to the Heart Center before the storm?" "We're coordinating with the port's emergency logistics team right now," Brooks said. "The containers are intact. The relabeling was superficial heat-applied plates over the originals. The originals are still there. Everything is accounted for." He paused. "The center's director has been contacted." She said. He stopped for a second, and something crossed his face that was too honest to be professional. She said the patients have been asking where the generators were for 3 weeks. She said one of the older veterans told her they'd show up. He said someone always comes through, eventually. Leah looked at the water. Benjamin Hart had said something like that once, in a different context. On a different piece of water, in the 40 minutes before she had lost him. He had said somebody always comes through. Usually it's the person who had the most reason not to. She had thought about those words for 8 months after he died, and she had not been able to make them feel like anything other than an indictment. She was not sure she was ready to make them feel like anything else yet. But she was standing here, on this dock, with his name on the building those generators were heading to, and she had come through. "What happens to my task force authorization?" she said. "The complaint is withdrawn," Brooks said. "Voss's legal team filed it. With Voss in custody, it collapses. The oversight board will clear you formally, but operationally you're back as of right now." He paused. "You went in without authorization." "I went in with a warrant that your office issued," Leah said. "I accompanied the subject of a federal investigation to a location relevant to that investigation. The photographs were retrieved from property belonging to a voluntary cooperating witness." Brooks looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very clean way to describe what happened tonight." "It's accurate," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost. The old night watchman," he said. "Carl Renfrew. He was doing rounds on the north side of the building during the entry. Rising water from the access channel had trapped him in the equipment alcove. One of my officers found him." Leah was quiet. "He said a woman found him first," Brooks said carefully. "Before my officer. Said she helped him get the door open and made sure he was stable and told him to stay put and went back into the building." He looked at her. "You detoured. There was a person in trouble," Leah said. "In the middle of an active, there was a person in trouble," she said again. Simply. Brooks nodded slowly. He understood the sentence. And what it meant about the person who had said it, and he did not push further. The water was getting louder off the coast. Not dramatically, just incrementally, the way serious things often arrive. Degree by degree, until the change is undeniable. Leah listened to it and felt the familiar pressure of weather building in the air around her and thought about the 60-hour window that was now down to 40 and the generators that were going to move at first light and the veterans at the Benjamin Hart Recovery Center who had been told not to worry, that everything would arrive on time, and who had waited through 3 weeks of uncertainty and would now have what they needed when the storm hit. She had done what she came here to do. Miles Rowe came out through the warehouse door behind her and stood for a moment adjusting to the air. And then he walked up beside her and looked at the water, the way people look at large things when they are still processing the size of smaller ones. "What happens now?" he said. "For you, protective custody until the preliminary hearings," Leah said. "Then a formal witness designation. Your testimony will be central to the federal prosecution. Your attorney, the task force, will provide one, will make sure you're supported through all of it." She paused. "And Miles?" "Yeah? What you did, 9 days alone in that apartment." "The photographs. Tonight." She looked at him. "You held on to something that most people would have let go of. That matters more than you know right now. It will matter more as time goes on." He looked at the ground for a moment. Then he said quietly, "My dad would have done it too. He wasn't afraid of the right thing." "No," Leah said. He wasn't. Somewhere across the port, in the heavy dark of the early morning, the first emergency logistics vehicle was pulling up to Warehouse 12's loading dock. She could hear it, the specific sound of something arriving at the place where it was supposed to be. It was a small sound in a large space, and it would have been easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She was paying attention. She always was. The generators reached the Benjamin Hart Veterans Recovery Center at 6:44 in the morning, which was 31 minutes before the storm's outer bands made first contact with the Virginia coast. Leah knew the exact time because she was there when they arrived. She had not planned to be. She had planned to file her closing operational report from the task force liaison office and then find somewhere quiet to sleep for 6 hours before the debrief that Ray Damaris had scheduled for the following afternoon. She had been awake for 26 consecutive hours. Her jaw still carried the dull specific ache of Owen Pike's open palm from the night before last, which felt like a different era entirely, the way the beginning of an operation always feels when you are standing at its end. But she had been in the car heading toward the liaison office when the center's logistics coordinator called Brooks to report that the delivery truck had a transponder issue and the driver wasn't familiar with the access road. And Brooks had relayed it to Leah because she was already in the area and because he understood without being told that she needed to see this particular thing arrive. So she was standing in the center's receiving bay when the first generator came off the truck, and she watched 2 orderlies and a night shift nurse guide it through the bay doors. And she felt something move through her chest that she did not have an immediate word for. It was not relief exactly. It was more specific than that. It was the feeling of a debt that you did not choose and cannot fully repay, being honored in the only way available to you, which is to make sure that the cost of someone else's sacrifice was not paid for nothing. Benjamin Hart had wanted to work with veterans when he left the service. He had told her that once, on a long transit across open water, when they had run out of operational topics and had wandered into the territory of actual conversation, he had said he wanted to do something that used what he knew in a way that didn't require anyone to get hurt. She had told him he was going soft. He had laughed and said maybe that was the point. She had not allowed herself to think about that conversation for 8 months after his death. Now she let herself think about it, standing in the receiving bay of a building that bore his name, watching equipment that she had recovered arrive at the place it had been intended for all along. She stayed through the installation. She stayed through the storm. The center's director, a steady-voiced woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, who had the particular competent calm of someone who has run a medical facility through multiple crises and stopped being surprised by the next one, had been awake since 4 a.m. and had organized her staff with the efficiency of a person who plans for contingencies the way other people plan for certainties. She found Leah in the hallway near the generator room at 7:15 and looked at her with the assessing directness of a physician. "You're the one who found them," Dr. Vance said. "Several people found them," Leah said. "I was one of them." "That's not what Brooks told me." "Brooks is generous," Leah said. Dr. Vance looked at her for a moment. "One of our residents has been asking about the investigation since the supplies went missing. Retired Master Sergeant, 71 years old. He served 3 tours. Came home with things that took 20 years to start addressing. He told me 3 weeks ago when the equipment was first delayed that somebody would come through." She paused. "He asked me this morning if he could meet the person who brought the generators." Leah was quiet. "You don't have to," Dr. Vance said. "I told him I'd ask." "What's his name?" Leah said. "Frank Delgado," Dr. Vance said. "He'll be awake. He doesn't sleep well when the weather changes." Frank Delgado was 71 years old and built like someone who had once been significantly larger and had become more concentrated with age, and he was sitting in a chair by the window of his room, listening to the storm with the focused appreciation of a man who has spent enough time in conditions that tried to kill him, that weather, which merely inconveniences him, is a form of luxury. He looked up when Leah came in, and he looked at her the way veterans sometimes look at each other, not with recognition exactly, but with the particular attentiveness that comes from a lifetime of assessing people by the way they occupy a room. "You're the one," he said. "I had a lot of help," Leah said. "Sit down," he said, in the tone of a man who is used to being obeyed, not because he demands it, but because people sense that the instruction is for their benefit as much as his. She sat. They talked for 40 minutes. He told her about his first deployment, which had been in a place she could not officially confirm she had also been. And they talked around that shared geography with the careful indirect language of people who understand classification. And then he told her about the 20 years after he came home, when the things he had brought back from those places had been louder than everything else in his life. He told her about his daughter, who had stopped speaking to him for 6 years and had started again 3 years ago because he had finally come to the center and started doing the work. What news? He told her about the morning he had first slept through the night in 11 years, which had happened in this building, in this room, 8 months ago. Leah listened. She was good at listening. It was a skill she had built in the field and had not lost in the years since. The ability to be fully present for another person's account of their own experience without filtering it through the demand to respond or fix or move it towards something useful. She just listened. At the end, Frank said, "You lost somebody." It was not a question. "Yes," she said, "on the job." "Yes," he nodded slowly. He looked at the window, where the storm was audible now, not violent yet, but insistent, the particular sound of weather that has made up its mind. "I lost men too," he said. 3 of them across 30 years. You never stopped thinking about whether you did everything you could." He paused. "Did you?" She had been asked versions of this question before, by therapists and colleagues, and once by a Naval Review Board, and she had answered it differently each time, depending on who was asking and what answer she thought would close the conversation most efficiently. She looked at Frank Delgado, who was 71 years old, and had spent 3 tours doing the same kind of work she had done, and had spent 20 years after that, learning how to be honest about the parts of himself he had tried to bury. And she decided to answer the question the way it deserved to be answered. "No," she said. "I don't think I did." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay. That's an honest answer," he said. "Most people can't give that one. They either say yes, and they're lying, or they say no, and they collapse into it. You just said it straight." He looked at her. "That means you already know the next part." "What's the next part?" she said. "That doing everything you can, and it not being enough is not the same as failing," he said. "It just feels the same for a long time." She held that. She held it the way you hold something fragile and heavy at the same time, carefully, with both hands without moving too fast. "Thank you," she said. She meant it exactly the way she said it. The storm hit fully at 9 a.m., and the center's newly installed generators absorbed the load without difficulty. And the lights stayed on, and the medical equipment stayed running. And the 47 residents of the Benjamin Hart Veterans Recovery Center moved through the storm day with the particular equanimity of people who have survived worse conditions than weather. Leah spent most of that day on the phone. Ray Damaris called at 9:30 to confirm that her task force authorization had been formally reinstated, that the complaint filed by Voss's legal team had been withdrawn following Voss's arrest, and that the Oversight Board had issued a preliminary finding that her actions at the Anchor House constituted proportional self-defense following an unprovoked assault. He said the finding would be finalized within 10 days. She said thank you and moved on. The calls after that were the careful, complicated work of an investigation moving from field operation into legal architecture. The federal prosecutor assigned to the Voss case was a methodical woman named Sandra Kuo, who asked questions with the precision of someone building a structure that needs to hold weight in court, rather than just in conversation. Leah answered them with equal precision, going through the chain of custody for Miles's photographs, the authorization timeline for the warrant, the specific sequence of events inside Warehouse 12, the circumstances of Voss's arrest, and the preservation of the dock-level recording. Sandra Kuo listened to all of it and then said, "The recording Tessa Rowe activated. Walk me through the legal basis for its admissibility." "It's a continuous compliance recording required under the port's fire safety certification," Leah said. "Tessa activated a system that was already authorized to run. She didn't install anything, didn't alter anything, didn't place any device. She pressed a button that activated an existing mandated system, and the
footage captured Voss,
giving direct instructions for the relocation of labeled containers. His voice, identified by 3 separate witnesses who will testify to recognizing it. His physical presence documented by the system internal timestamp. Leah paused. There is no exclusionary argument available. The system was designed to run. She ran it. The waitress, Sandra Guo said. Her name is Tessa Rowe, Leah said. Right. A pause that had the quality of a recalibration. How is she? She lost her job this morning. She activated a fire safety recording system in a warehouse in the middle of the night. She's doing considerably better than most people would. By noon, Owen Pike's attorney had contacted the federal prosecutor's office to discuss a cooperation agreement. This was not a surprise. It was the predictable arithmetic of a man who had access to a lawyer and could count. Owen faced assault charges, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit theft of federal property, and witness intimidation. Darren Voss faced all of those plus money laundering, federal fraud, and bribery of a public official. The cooperation calculus was straightforward. Owen knew more about Voss's operation than the investigation had yet documented, and that knowledge had a value that diminished with each passing hour as the physical evidence made testimony less necessary. Brooks called Leah to tell her about the cooperation discussion at 12:40. What does he have that we don't? Leah said. He knows the full list of Port Authority employees compromised, Brooks said. Marsh is one name. Owen is saying there are 4 more. And he knows about 2 other shipping companies running the same falsified manifest operation through different ports. Leah absorbed this. Not Tidewater alone. A network. What does he want? She said. Reduced charges. No federal prison on the theft conspiracy if he pleads to the assault and the tampering. Brooks's voice was careful. Sandra Guo is considering it. The assault charge, Leah said. That's mine. Yes, Brooks said. She was quiet for a moment. Owen Pike had walked into the Anchor House 2 nights ago to intimidate a young woman whose brother had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. He had publicly humiliated her, filed a false complaint, had her fired, and spent the middle of the night trying to destroy evidence that connected him to the theft of equipment intended for vulnerable people in a building named after a man who had given everything he had. He had also, in the bar, in front of 40 witnesses, slapped her across the face with enough force that the sound had stopped conversation across the room. He was not someone she felt the need to protect, but he was also, at this specific moment, someone whose cooperation would expose a broader network of corruption than the Tidewater case alone. And Leah Mercer had never once in her life allowed a personal grievance to degrade an operational outcome. I won't block it, she said. But Guo needs to make sure the cooperation agreement requires him to testify in person. Written statement only is not enough. He stands up in a courtroom and says what he knows. Agreed, Brooks said. And Tessa Rowe gets a formal acknowledgement in the federal record that her termination was retaliatory and connected to the investigation. Not as a footnote, as a finding. I'll make sure of it, Brooks said. Then I won't block it, Leah said again. The afternoon moved through its hours, pushing against the coast, and the investigation expanding outward from Tidewater in the way that genuine institutional corruption always expands when it's finally pulled into the light, not contained, as it first appears, but networked, root systems running under the visible surface, in directions that's everyone except the people who had been paying attention all along. Aaron Bell had been paying attention all along. She called him at 2 p.m. Are you watching the news? She said when he picked up. I don't watch the news, he said. I read primary sources. A pause. But yes, I've seen the arrest announcements. The 4 other Port Authority employees, she said. Voss's other contacts. Were any of them on your list? A silence that lasted precisely long enough to answer the question before he said anything. 2 of them, Aaron said. I had their names in the folder I gave you. You never said that. You hadn't asked yet, he said simply. She almost laughed. Almost, Aaron. You have been sitting on that information for how long? Since October, he said. 8 months. I didn't have enough to take it anywhere alone. I needed someone who could use it. He paused. Then someone walked into the Anchor House. She thought about 8 months. She thought about 4 months of documented observations and 2 names he had recognized and a folder on a kitchen table in a retired Navy man's home. carried alone in the patient certainty that eventually someone would show up who could do something with it. "Come to the task force debrief tomorrow," she said. "2 p.m. You're not optional anymore. You're a witness." "I know," he said. "I've been ready." The news cycle found the story at 3 p.m. The bar footage, the full version, all 3 cameras synchronized, showing Owen's approach, the humiliation of Tessa, the slap, the takedown. The subsequent police response was released by Officer Santos's department as part of the criminal complaint filing. It ran on the local affiliate at 3 and had been picked up by national feeds by 4. The 17-second clip that Owen had posted the previous night was everywhere. But now it existed alongside the context that destroyed its narrative. You could watch the short version and then watch the full version and understand precisely what had been removed and why. The internet, Leah had observed over the course of her operational career, was frequently a mechanism for the distribution of bad information. Occasionally it operated in reverse. By 5 p.m. the Anchor House bar footage had been viewed 400,000 times. By 6 it was 1 million. The comments were running in a direction that she chose not to read. Not because she was indifferent to public reaction, but because public reaction to the thing that had happened to her personally was not information she needed to make the next decision. Tessa called her at 5:30. "I've been offered 63 media interviews," Tessa said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who is trying to find the funny side of a situation that is too large and strange to process any other way. "How many are you considering?" Leah said. "None," Tessa said. "I turned them all down." A pause. "I want to say something. But I want to say it right. Not in a 4-minute interview where someone edits it down to 15 seconds. "What do you want to say?" Leah asked. Tessa was quiet for a moment. "I want to say that what Owen did to me in that bar, it wasn't special. It wasn't unusual. It was a Tuesday. It was just another Tuesday of the thing that happened in that bar every time he came in, and nobody said anything because he was the port supervisor and his employer had a corporate tab, and that was just how it was." Her voice steadied. "I want people to understand that the thing that changed wasn't him. He was always going to be that person. The thing that changed was that someone said stop. And then someone got the footage, and then someone took it seriously. And then someone kept going even when they were told to stop." She paused. "That's not superhero stuff. That's just people doing the next right thing." Leah said nothing for a moment. She was sitting in the center's family waiting room, which was where she had ended up after the calls, and the debrief prep, and the storm moving through the coast. And the room was quiet, and the storm was audible against the windows, and somewhere down the hall, Frank Delgado was probably listening to it with his focused appreciation and thinking about his daughter. And the 8 months of sleeping through the night. "You should write it," Leah said. "What you just said to me. Write it down the way you just said it. Not for the media. For yourself first, and then decide what you want to do with it." "Okay," Tessa said. And Tessa, the victim advocate Brooks arranged. "Have you spoken with her?" "For 3 hours this afternoon," Tessa said. "She's going to help me file for the wrongful termination documentation and the formal retaliation finding." A pause. "She told me about the federal record acknowledgement you asked Brooks to include." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Leah said. "It's accurate. It goes in the record." Miles came back to the center at 6 p.m. He came with the victim advocate and a task force legal liaison and a change of clothes in a bag, and he was under formal protective status now, which meant there were people responsible for his safety who were not him and not his sister. And he seemed to find this strange and uncomfortable, in the way that young people who have been carrying their own fear for a long time find it uncomfortable when someone takes it from them, because they have gotten used to the weight. He found Leah in the waiting room and sat across from her. "I spoke with the prosecutor," he said. "Good. She said my photographs are the documentary anchor of the federal case." Those were her words. He looked at his hands. 3 days I spent taking those. 3 days going back, making sure I had the angles, making sure the timestamps were intact. I was terrified the whole time. My hands were shaking in 3 of the shots. He looked up. Will that matter, the shaking? The images are sharp, Leah said. I looked at all 31. The shaking didn't affect the resolution. He nodded. I was so scared, he said. Not as a confession, but as a statement of fact. The kind that a person makes when they have decided that the fear was real, and it is allowed to have been real, and naming it out loud does not diminish what they did in the middle of it. I know, Leah said. Courage doesn't require the absence of fear. It requires the decision to act despite it. She paused. You acted, Miles, repeatedly. Over 3 days of photographing. Over 9 days of waiting, and last night when you came to the warehouse. Last night was stupid, he said. I shouldn't have come. Tessa activated the recording system, Leah said. The system that documented Voss giving direct instructions on site. That recording is going to be the difference between a conviction and a negotiated plea. She looked at him. You came, and she came with you, and she knew where the panel was. Sometimes the thing that looks like a mistake is the thing that closes the case. He sat with that for a moment. The storm was louder now, and the building's lights held steady, and somewhere in the mechanical room the generators were running, with the quiet, reliable persistence of equipment that is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Brooks arrived at 7, with paperwork for Miles and food for everyone. Because Brooks was the kind of person who remembered that people needed to eat even when the situation made it easy to forget. He sat down with Leah while Miles and the legal liaison worked through the formal witness designation documents. And he put a paper cup of coffee in front of her without asking whether she wanted it. Ellen Marsh, he said. She's cooperating. Leah looked at him. Fully, Brooks said. Her attorney made the call at 4 p.m. She has documentation of the entire operation going back to the original contract flagging, including email correspondence with Voss that predates the Heart Center contract by 16 months. He paused. She was being blackmailed. At the beginning, Voss had information about a previous irregularity in her contract processing a small thing. Years ago, the kind of mistake that can be explained, but that becomes something else when someone holds it over you. Leah absorbed this. She went from blackmail victim to active participant, somewhere in the middle of 14 months. Yes, Brooks said. She made choices. She made them repeatedly. The blackmail explains the entry point, but it doesn't explain all of it. He looked at his coffee. Her attorney is arguing coercion throughout. Sandra Kuo is not fully buying it. She shouldn't, Leah said. But it should be on the record. How the entry point works. Because if it's not on the record, the next Voss finds the next Marsh and uses the same mechanism. Brooks looked at her steadily. You're thinking about it systemically. I'm always thinking about it systemically, Leah said. The individual cases matter. The convictions matter. But what matters more is whether anything changes afterward. She drank the coffee. Does it? Sometimes, Brooks said, when the right people pay attention long enough. The right people. She thought about Aaron Bell, 8 months at a kitchen table. She thought about Miles Rowe, 3 days of shaking photographs. She thought about Tessa, who had grown up on this coast, who had worked a summer job on a dock at 21 and had remembered where the compliance recording panel was at 23 when it mattered most. She thought about Walt the bartender, who had said he should have asked questions sooner and who would be testifying to the full sequence of the bar footage. She thought about Gerald Holt, who had been frightened for 6 days and had come anyway. She thought about Officer Santos, who had asked for all 3 cameras before anyone could request a deletion. She thought about Caleb Brooks, sitting across from her with a paper cup of diner coffee, who had moved a warrant through Judge Hensley in 3 hours on the basis of a retired man's kitchen table notes and a young woman's account of what she had seen in a cargo warehouse. None of these people were superhero stuff. They were just people who had done the next right thing. And then the next one, and then the one after that. The storm moved through the night and into the morning, and then began to pull back. The way storms do, leaving the particular battered clarity that follows a thing that has been building for days. At first light, the coast looked scraped and sharp and full of the particular silence of an absence of noise rather than the presence of quiet. Leah stood outside the center's entrance and felt the changed air and thought about the week that had passed since she had driven into Virginia Beach on a task force briefing that had listed the case as a missing equipment report. Dr. Vance came out and stood beside her. "How are you doing?" she said. "I'm fine," Leah said. "That's not what I asked, Doctor," Vance said pleasantly. Leah looked at her. Dr. Vance was looking at the horizon with the practiced serenity of someone who has learned that the only honest answer to the most important questions is the one that costs something to give. "I'm tired," Leah said, "and I think something has shifted that I haven't fully processed yet. And I think I'll be fine, but not in the immediate and meaningless way that people usually mean when they say it." "That's more like it, Doctor," Vance said. "We have a good counselor on staff. She works with veterans and with operational personnel. If you wanted to talk to someone while you're here." Leah thought about Frank Delgado, who had told her the thing she had needed to hear without being asked to say it. She thought about 8 months of not allowing herself to remember a conversation on open water about what a man wanted to do when the service was done. She thought about the particular loneliness of a guilt that you have decided is a form of loyalty to the person you failed. "Maybe," she said. It was a different answer than she would have given 6 days ago. She recognized that, and she let herself recognize it, which was itself different from 6 days ago. The sun came through the clouds at 7:15, pale and tentative, the way it always came after a coast storm, uncertain at first, then more certain, building towards something warmer than anyone had remembered to expect. Leah watched it come, and she did not look away. The debrief lasted 4 hours. Sandra Kuo ran it with the particular focused efficiency of a federal prosecutor who has a strong case and knows it, and is therefore not interested in anything that doesn't make it stronger. She had Leah Brooks, Aaron Bell, Gerald Holt, and Miles Rowe in the same room for the first time, and she worked through the timeline from the falsified manifests to the doc recording with the methodical precision of someone assembling a structure that needs to hold weight in front of a jury. When it was over, she closed her folder and looked around the table and said, "This is one of the cleaner evidentiary chains I've seen in a case of this complexity. Every link holds." Aaron Bell, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with his hands folded and his expression composed for 4 hours, allowed himself the smallest possible smile. Leah noticed it and said nothing. But she filed it away in the place where she kept things that mattered, the image of a 64-year-old man with a bad left knee who had spent 8 months alone at a kitchen table, doing the work that nobody had asked him to do. Finally sitting in a room where that work was being used. After the debrief, Leah walked out with Brooks. The morning was sharp and clean in the way that follows a hard storm. The air so clear it almost hurt to breathe it, the kind of clarity that feels like something has been settled rather than merely changed. "Voss's attorneys filed a motion this morning," Brooks said. "Which motion?" "Challenging the warrant timeline. Arguing that the information used to support it was improperly obtained because your task force authorization was suspended at the time you gathered it." Leah stopped walking. "My authorization was suspended when I conducted the initial witness interviews. The warrant was based on Aaron's documented observations, Gerald Holt's testimony, and Miles's voluntary cooperation. None of that passed through my task force access." "I know," Brooks said. "Sandra knows. The motion is going to fail, but it tells us something. Voss has a good lawyer," Leah said. "Voss has 4 good lawyers," Brooks said. "This is going to take time. The preliminary hearings are set for 6 weeks out. The federal prosecution is probably 18 months to trial. Maybe more. 18 months. She thought about what 18 months meant for Miles Rowe, who was 26 years old and had spent 9 days in his cousin's apartment and was now formally designated a federal witness with a legal team he had never asked for. She thought about what it meant for Tessa, who had lost her job on a morning that already felt like it belonged to a different story. who had turned down 63 media interviews and had spent an evening writing something she wasn't sure yet what to do with. Miles will hold, she said. It was not a prediction. It was an assessment, made with the same tools she used to assess everyone observation. Pattern. The particular way a person moves through pressure. He's steadier than he looks. He is, Brooks agreed. Tessa will be fine, she said. She's already fine. She's been fine since the moment she decided to walk into that warehouse. She paused. Aaron needs to be formally recognized as a contributing investigative witness. He built the foundation of this case for 8 months, with no support and no institutional backing. That should be on the record. I've already filed it, Brooks said. His documentation is cited in the federal complaint as primary evidence. She nodded. She had known he would have done it. She had asked anyway. Because some things needed to be said out loud, even when you already knew the answer. They reached the end of the parking structure, and the coast was visible ahead of them. And the water was the dark greenish-gray of the morning after a storm. Heavy and slow and settling. Brooks looked at it the way people from coastal cities look at water, with a familiarity that has stopped being conscious and become instead a kind of reference point. The way some people use mountains or skylines. What are you going to do? He said. I have a task force debrief in D.C. next week, she said. The case is being expanded. The 2 other ports Owen identified. The additional shell companies, Ray wants a full operational review. After that, Brooks said. She looked at the water. The question had a weight to it that she recognized. It was not a casual question about logistics. It was the question that people ask when they have watched someone do something and have understood, in the watching, that the person doing it might not have asked it of themselves yet. She had not asked it of herself yet. She was asking it now. I don't know, she said, which was, for Leah Mercer, an unusually honest answer. Brooks nodded like that was the right one. For what it's worth, he said, you're good at this. Not the tactical part, although that's clearly not a problem. The other part, the way you talk to people. Miles. Tessa, Frank Delgado, he paused. Whatever that is, it's not something they teach. They teach it, she said. You just can't teach it in a classroom. He looked at her. Then he held out his hand. She shook it. It was a brief, firm handshake. The handshake of 2 people who have worked alongside each other in conditions that stripped away every professional formality and have arrived at the other side with something that is cleaner and more durable than what they started with. Virginia Beach is a small city, he said. I'll see you around. You'll see me around, she agreed. 6 weeks passed, then 12. Then the preliminary hearings began. And Leah was in D.C. for some of them and in Virginia Beach for others. And the case grew in the way that cases built on real institutional corruption always grow outward, revealing roots that had been running underground for longer than anyone wanted to believe. The 2 additional ports Owen had identified yielded 3 more shell companies and 7 additional names. 2 of them federal employees. One of them, a congressional staffer who had been feeding contract information to Voss Network for 22 months. The story that had started as a missing equipment report had become something considerably larger, and Leah moved through it with the particular combination of patience and precision that had defined her operational work. Building the documentary record, then the witness network and the evidentiary chain with the same meticulous care she had once applied to maritime rescue planning, because the work was the same at its foundation, regardless of whether the environment was a cargo warehouse or an open ocean. You identified what was missing. You located it. You brought it back. Owen Pike pleaded guilty to assault and evidence tampering in month 4. He stood in the courtroom and he looked, for the first time in Leah's observation of him, like the actual size of himself, not the inflated, space-occupying presence he had projected in the bar and the warehouse and all the spaces where he had used his supervisor's jacket and Voss's corporate tab to make himself larger than he was, but a man of ordinary dimensions facing the ordinary consequences of choices he had made freely and had told himself were something other than what they were. He testified for 3 days in the federal hearing. He was thorough. He was specific. He named names and dates and locations and amounts. And he did it with the particular quality of a man who has finally stopped defending the story he has been living in and is trying instead to simply tell the true one. It was not redemption. Leah did not think in terms of redemption for people who had done what Owen had done. But it was accountability, which was different, and which was in her experience the more useful of the two. After his testimony, Leah was in the courthouse hallway when Owen walked past with his attorney. He stopped. His attorney said something low and advisory that he did not appear to hear. He looked at Leah with the expression of a man who has been rehearsing something and has arrived at the moment of delivering it and is no longer entirely sure it's the right thing to say. "The bar," he said. "I wanted you to know I know what I did. In the bar, I've known for a long time. I just stopped." He looked at the floor and then back at her. "I used to think being the one in charge meant being the one who couldn't be touched. I understand now that's not what it means." Leah looked at him for a moment. She did not say that it was all right, because it was not all right. She did not say that she forgave him, because forgiveness was her own business, and not something she distributed in courthouse hallways. She said the thing that was both true and necessary. "Make it mean something." He nodded once. He walked away. His attorney gave Leah the particular look of a lawyer who has just watched a client do something unscripted in a sensitive legal environment and is calculating the implications, and then apparently decided they were neutral and followed his client down the hall. Tessa called that evening. "I heard he testified," she said. "He did," Leah said. "Miles says it was thorough." It was a pause. "How do you feel about it?" "Like it's the correct sequence of events in a functional justice process," Leah said. Then because Tessa deserved better than that, and like it's not the part that matters most. The part that matters most was Miles's photographs, and the doc recording, and Aaron's 8 months of notes, and you remembering where a compliance panel was from a summer job 2 years ago. Owen's testimony is just the machinery working the way it's supposed to. Does it ever? Tessa said. Work the way it's supposed to? Sometimes, Leah said. When enough people refused to look away. The silence that followed had the quality of something settling. "I made a decision," Tessa said. "I've been sitting on it for a while. I wanted to tell you before it became official." "Tell me," Leah said. "The Federal Victim Support Office," Tessa said. "They offered me a position. Community liaison, working with port workers, maritime employees, people in industrial communities who've experienced workplace intimidation or retaliation. Helping them understand their rights, helping them understand how to report safely." She paused. "It's not waitressing." "No," Leah said, "it's not. It pays less than I thought it would," Tessa said. "And it's going to be hard sometimes. The advocate told me that some days it's going to feel like nothing is moving, and everything is too slow, and the system is too complicated for anyone to get through it." "She's right," Leah said. "She also said that the reason the work matters is exactly because it's hard," Tessa said. "That the people who need it most are the people who've been told, the most times, that there's no point in trying." "She's right about that too," Leah said. "I said yes," Tessa said. "I know," Leah said. "I recommended you for it 3 months ago." A pause. Then Tessa laughed, a real laugh, the surprised kind that breaks through when something lands exactly right. "You didn't tell me. I wanted it to be your decision," Leah said. "Not mine." What happened next came from a direction Leah had not expected, which was unusual enough that she noted it with the particular attention she reserved for things that fell outside her operational models. It came from the Benjamin Hart Veterans Recovery Center. Specifically from Dr. Patricia Vance, who called on a Thursday morning 4 months after the arrests and said, without any lead-in, "I have a proposal. I want you to say no if it's wrong. But I need you to hear it first." Leah said, "Go ahead, doctor." Vance told her about the center's new intake figures, up 31% since the story had run nationally. Because the coverage had done something that years of targeted outreach had not quite managed. which was to make veterans who had been living with untreated trauma feel that the institution existed and was real and was for them. The center was growing faster than its current staffing model could support, and it was specifically short of people who understood how to work with veterans coming out of special operations backgrounds, people whose experience was specific enough that ordinary therapeutic frameworks addressed only the surface of it. "We need someone who can bridge that," Dr. Vance had said. "Someone who has operational experience and who has done their own work. Someone the patients will recognize as someone who understands what they carried." Leah was quiet. "I'm not asking you to be a therapist," Dr. Vance said. "I'm asking you to consider a part-time consultancy, working alongside our clinical team, helping with intake assessments for operational personnel, being in the room for the conversations that require someone who has been in similar rooms." "I'm still active on the task force case," Leah said. "The consultancy would be part-time," Dr. Vance said. "It could work alongside your existing commitments. At least to start." "Why me? Because Frank Delgado asked for you, Doctor," Vance said simply. "And because in 18 years of running this center, I have never once seen a person sit with Frank for 40 minutes and leave that room without both of them having gotten something they needed. That's a rare thing. It's not a credential, it's something else." Leah thought about Frank Delgado listening to the storm with his focused appreciation. She thought about what he had said to her: "Doing everything you can and it not being enough is not the same as failing." She thought about 8 months of not letting herself remember a conversation about what Benjamin Hart wanted to do when the service was done, and about what it had felt like, in a receiving bay at 6:44 in the morning, to watch equipment bearing his name arrive at the place it had always been intended to go. She thought about what Brooks had said: "Whatever that is, it's not something they teach," she said. "Send me the proposal." The Stillwater Initiative was Leah's idea, and it took shape the way her best ideas always did, not in a single moment of clarity, but through the gradual accumulation of observations that eventually reached a critical mass and became something actionable. She had been collecting the component pieces for months without naming them. Tessa's new role and what it could connect to, Aaron's institutional knowledge of the port system and how it could be formalized, Brooks's legal framework for witness protection and community reporting, the center's growing need for operational liaisons, and her own understanding, built over 9 years of naval service and 3 years of task force work, of how intimidation systems survive. They survive because the people who witness them believe that intervention is someone else's job. The Stillwater Initiative's founding premise was simple. It was not someone else's job. It was everyone's job. And the reason most people didn't do it was not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how. And not knowing how had been allowed to function as a reason not to try. The curriculum took 6 weeks to develop and another 4 to pilot. Tessa ran the community sessions. Brooks taught the legal module what you can report, how you report it, what protections exist, what to do when those protections are not honored. Aaron ran the port industry track, working with dock workers and cargo clerks and freight managers, teaching them the specific language of maritime compliance and the specific mechanisms by which the systems they worked inside could be manipulated and how to recognize those manipulations before they became entrenched. Leah taught the de-escalation module, not how to physically control a situation that was a last resort, and she said so in the first 5 minutes of every session. She taught how to read a room, how to recognize the difference between loudness and danger, how to intervene with words before words stopped being available, how to be the person who says something without becoming the next target. She taught it the way she had learned it, not from a curriculum, but from years of walking into spaces where the wrong decision had a permanent cost, and learning to slow down inside that cost and make the right one anyway. The first cohort was 14 people, 4 bartenders, 3 nurses, 2 port employees, 2 veterans, a school counselor, a hotel manager, and Walt, who had stood behind the bar of the Anchor House for 11 years. and had poured Owen Pike's drinks on Darren Voss's tab and had not asked questions he should have asked, had called Leah 2 months after the arrests and said, "Tell me what to do differently." She had told him about the initiative. He had registered the same afternoon. He sat in the front row of every session. He asked the most questions. He was, Leah realized, not trying to understand what he should have done. He already knew that. He was trying to build the specific competency to do it the next time, which was a different and more constructive project. After the final session of the first cohort, he stayed behind while the others filtered out. He stood with his jacket over his arm, and he looked at her with the direct, undefended honesty of a person who has decided to say the thing rather than not. At the bar, he said that night, when he slapped you, I had the phone in my hand before it happened. I'd been watching him for 40 minutes. I knew something was going to happen. He paused. I didn't call until you asked me to. You called, she said. You had to ask me to. Yes, she said. But you called. That's not enough, he said. That's not what I want to be. Then you're already not that person anymore, she said. The fact that you know it's not enough is the beginning of being enough. He thought about that. Then he nodded, put his jacket on, and thanked her and left. She watched him go and thought about the particular courage of ordinary people who do not have tactical training or federal authorization or 9 years of special operations experience, but who decide to be present and accountable in the spaces they occupy every day. She had spent her career around people who were trained to be exceptional in extraordinary circumstances. She had spent the last 6 months watching people who were ordinary in extraordinary circumstances become something they had not been before. She was not sure which was more remarkable. 6 months after the Stillwater Initiative launched its first cohort, the second cohort had 28 participants. The third was already oversubscribed. Aaron Bell was running the port industry sessions independently, which he did with the particular authority of someone who has spent 8 months alone, building the evidence base for something, and is now finally doing it in a room full of other people. He brought his kitchen table notes to the first session as a visual aid, the full folder, 4 months of handwritten observations, and he set it on the table and told the participants, "This is what one person paying attention looks like." Then he told them what happened when someone showed up who could use it. Frank Delgado came to the third cohort as a guest speaker. Dr. Vance had suggested it, and he had agreed with the particular directness of a man who has stopped declining things that cost him something, but that matter. He talked for an hour about 30 years of service and 20 years of silence, and 8 months at the Benjamin Hart Recovery Center, and what it had taken doing the work he should have done a decade earlier. He was not polished, and he was not neat, and he repeated himself twice in ways that were clearly unintentional. The room was completely silent for the entire hour. At the end, a young port worker in the second row, who had not said a single word in any of the 3 previous sessions, raised her hand and asked a question that made Frank go still for a moment before he answered it. And the question was, how do you know when you're ready to say something? Frank had looked at her for a long moment, and then he had said, "You're not. You say it anyway. That's the whole thing." The anchor house was where it ended and where it began again. The evening was a Thursday, which had been Owen Pike's night for 4 years, and which was now just Thursday, which was what it had always been before him. The bar was full with the end-of-shift crowd from the port and the residential neighborhood that had grown up around the waterfront in the last decade, and the music was something different country, a younger sound. Not better or worse, just different. The way things are different when time passes and the room changes its population. Walt was behind the bar. He had installed a clear anti-harassment policy in a frame beside the register 6 months ago, and he had apologized to his staff at a meeting that had lasted 2 hours, and that he had prepared for with the same thorough seriousness he brought to everything he had done since January. And the apology had been accepted with the particular complex grace of people who are capable of holding the acknowledgement of harm and the continuation of a relationship at the same time. Leah was in the corner booth, same table as before. Back to the wall, sightline to the door, and both exits and the kitchen, and every person between her and the bar. This was not a habit she was going to lose, and she had decided that was acceptable. Some things that training builds are tools, not damage, and the difference is what you do with them. Tessa was there. She had come after her shift at the victim support office, and she had ordered what Leah was having, which was water with lemon. And she was telling Leah about a case she had been working a cargo dock worker in Norfolk who had witnessed inventory manipulation and had sat on it for 3 months because he didn't know reporting was safe and hadn't had anyone tell him. Otherwise, until Tessa had shown up at a Stillwater Initiative outreach event at a Union Hall in Hampton Roads, and he had stood in the back for 45 minutes before approaching her. He came in yesterday, Tessa said. Formal interview. Full statement. His supervisor has been doing it for 2 years. She shook her head. 2 years. He's been watching it for 2 years. How is he? Leah said. Scared, Tessa said. But moving, she paused. Like Miles was. That specific kind of scared where the moving is bigger than the fear. Across the bar, the door opened and a group came in from the evening shift, dock workers still in their work clothes. Loud in the uncomplicated way of people who have finished a long shift and are glad to be somewhere warm. They took the corner tables, and a young woman who had started working the floor 3 months ago, her name was Jana. And she was quick and competent, and had taken every single Stillwater Initiative session that was open to bar staff, moved to take their order with the efficient attention that Tessa had once brought to the same room. One of the dock workers said something that Leah did not hear from across the bar. Jana paused. She said something back, brief, direct, not loud. The dock worker looked surprised for a moment. Then he laughed. Not a dismissive laugh. A genuine one. The laugh of a man who has just been spoken to like a person by another person and has recognized it as a form of respect. He adjusted how he had been sitting and gave Jana his order, and the table moved on. Tessa had watched this. She looked at Leah. Did you see that? She said. Yes, Leah said. She didn't need us, Tessa said. No, Leah said. She didn't. Aaron Bell came in at 8 and took the stool at the bar that he had occupied on the night that everything started. And Walt poured him a coffee without being asked, and the two of them talked in the easy way of people who have developed a regard for each other that does not require much explanation. Aaron pulled out a notebook, a new one, not the kitchen table folder, but something smaller, something ongoing, and showed Walt something he had written, and Walt read it and said something that made Aaron nod slowly. Brooks came in just after 8:30. He was off duty, and he was in jeans and a jacket, and he looked like what he was when he wasn't working, which was a quiet man from a coastal city who had chosen a hard profession because he understood that the hard ones were the ones that mattered, and who had never once, since making that choice, wished he had made a different one. He sat at the corner of the bar and ordered what he always ordered. And he looked around the room with the particular attentiveness that never fully left people who had done his job. And his eyes found Leah's across the room, and he lifted his chin in the brief, economical greeting of someone who does not need words for this specific kind of recognition. The room filled. The evening moved through itself with the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of a Thursday that was just a Thursday, people ending their days, beginning their evenings, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't, arguing about the game and the weather and the next shift and the thing the manager said and what they were doing this weekend. All of the accumulated ordinary life of a community that has been through something and has come out the other side not unchanged, but perhaps more awake than it was before. And then, near the far end of the bar, a man's voice rose above the general register of the room. He was not Owen Pike. He was no one anyone had heard of. He was a man who had had enough drinks to make himself believe that the particular waitress taking orders at the table beside him owed him something she had not agreed to give him. And he said so at a volume designed to demonstrate that he expected no consequences. Jana stopped. Walt looked up from the bar. Two of the dock workers at the table nearest to the man looked at each other. One of them said, in a voice that was not aggressive, but was absolutely clear. "Hey, that's enough." The man looked over. He saw the dock worker. He saw the other people at the table who were all looking at him in the same composed, unembarrassed way. He saw Walt, who had put down the glass he was polishing, and was looking at him with the direct attention of a person who has made a decision about what kind of bar this is. He saw Jana, who had not moved away but had not retreated, who was simply standing there with her order pad and the steady confidence of someone who has been told by the institution she works in that she is not alone. The man looked around the room. He did not see anyone looking away. He put his money on the table and left. The room settled back into itself in the easy, self-correcting way of a system that has found a new equilibrium, not the equilibrium of silence and an avoidance, but the equilibrium of a community that has decided, collectively and without ceremony, what it will and will not accept from the people who move through it. Leah Mercer sat in the corner booth with her water glass in her hand. She had not stood up. She had not needed to. She was sitting exactly where she had been sitting. And she was watching the room do the thing she had spent 6 months helping it learn to do. And she felt something move through her that was not quite pride. It was something quieter and more specific than pride. Something that had the weight of all the things that had been carried to get here. Every photograph, and every testimony, and every 3-hour warrant hearing, and every 40-minute conversation in a room by a window, and every session of a curriculum on the premise that ordinary people have extraordinary capacity if someone shows them how to use it. She thought about Benjamin Hart. She thought about what he had said on the water about not doing something that used what you knew in a way that didn't require anyone to get hurt. She thought about how she had told him he was going soft, and how he had laughed and said maybe that was the point. She let herself think about it without flinching. That was new. That was different. That was the thing that had shifted in the receiving bay at 6:44 in the morning, when she had watched the equipment bearing his name go through the bay doors. And that had continued shifting in the 40 minutes with Frank Delgado. And that had kept moving in the slow, undramatic, unglamorous months of building something useful out of everything that had happened here. She was still a SEAL-trained operative with 9 years of Naval Special Warfare and 3 years of task force work. She was still the person who had dropped Owen Pike in 2 seconds in a bar and who had walked into a warehouse at midnight without authorization because the math of waiting did not favor the people who needed the outcome. She was still that person, and she was not pretending otherwise, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Because what she had learned in this city, on this coast, in this bar, was not that strength was the wrong thing to have. It was that strength was only the beginning of what you could offer people. The rest of it, the listening, the patience, the willingness to sit in someone else's fear without rushing it toward resolution. The decision to build something that outlasted the crisis that had made it necessary, that was the longer work. That was the work that Benjamin Hart had been pointing toward when he talked about what he wanted to do with what he knew. That was the work she was still learning how to do. And she was not finished. Tessa was saying something beside her about the Norfolk case and what the next steps were and what she needed from the task force legal team. And Leah was listening with the full, precise attention she gave to everything that mattered. And the bar was warm and full and loud with the ordinary life of people who had decided to be present in it. And outside the coast was dark, and the water was running its old, indifferent course along a shore that had seen 1,000 stories and would see 1,000 more. Leah Mercer set her water glass down on the table. She looked around the room at Walt, at Tessa, at Jana moving through the tables with her order pad and her undefeated calm, and she understood, with a clarity that required no dramatic arrival, that this was what it looked like when silence finally stopped being mistaken for surrender. Not a single dramatic moment. Not one person with the right training in the right place at the right time. But a room full of ordinary people who had decided that looking away was no longer available to them as an option, and that decision, made quietly, collectively, without ceremony or announcement, was the most powerful thing she had ever been part of. She had spent 9 years learning how to walk into danger alone. It had taken her 6 months in Virginia Beach to understand that the harder thing, the braver thing, the thing that actually changed what came next, was teaching an entire room to walk into it together. That was the mission. That had always been the mission. She had just needed to find the right place to understand it, and now she had.